Hello and welcome to Cheating Tales Lab. We're so grateful you're here. Let's kick things off with today's thrilling story. Kevin Sawyer's calloused hands gripped a cold beer as he surveyed his backyard. Friends and family milled about, paper plates laden with barbecue and potato salad. It was his 45th birthday, but something felt off. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the neatly trimmed lawn. Kevin's steely blue eyes narrowed as he caught sight of his wife Miranda. She was laughing too loudly at something their neighbor, Noelle Morrison, had said. Her hand lingered on Noelle's arm a beat too long. Kevin's jaw tightened. He'd known Miranda for 20 years, been married to her for 17. He knew her tells. The way her eyes darted away when she lied. The slight tremor in her voice when she was hiding something. And right now, every instinct honed by years in construction management was screaming that something was very wrong. He drained his beer and headed for the cooler, nodding at acquaintances as he passed. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Miranda lean in close to whisper something to Noelle. Noelle's hand brushed the small of her back. Kevin's fingers tightened around the neck of his fresh beer bottle. He wanted to march over there, to demand answers. But no, not here, not now. He'd confront her later, when the guests were gone. When their 16-year-old son Zach wasn't around to witness whatever ugliness might unfold. "Hey, Kevin," his coworker, Tom, called out. "Great party, man. How's it feel to be halfway to 90? Kevin forced a smile. "Like I need another beer. You want one?" As the party wound down, Kevin found himself in the kitchen, loading the dishwasher. Miranda breezed in, her cheeks flushed from wine and laughter. "Need any help, birthday boy?" she asked, her tone light. Kevin straightened, fixing her with a hard stare. "What's going on with you and Noelle?" Miranda's smile faltered for just a moment before she recovered. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb, Miranda. I saw you two out there, whispering, touching. What's going on?" Miranda's eyes flashed with defiance. The mask of the dutiful wife slipped away, revealing something cold and unfamiliar beneath. "He's been more of a husband to me than you ever were in our 17 years of marriage," she spat. The words hit Kevin like a physical blow. Before he could respond, a new voice joined the fray. "Dad, don't bother asking questions. He's been spending more nights here than you." Kevin turned to see Zach standing in the doorway, his young face twisted with a mixture of anger and pain. The boy's words hung in the air, heavy with accusation and betrayal. "Zach," Miranda started, her voice suddenly soft. "Honey, it's not what you think." "Save it, Mom," Zach cut her off. "I'm not stupid. I've seen the texts. I've heard the phone calls. How could you do this to Dad?" In that moment, Kevin's world imploded. The carefully constructed facade of his life, the happy marriage, the stable home, crumbled around him. Rage boiled up inside him, threatening to overflow. With a voice that sounded calmer than he felt, Kevin addressed the remaining guests. "Party's over, folks. Thanks for coming, but it's time to go." People began to file out, murmuring confused goodbyes. But Noelle, emboldened by alcohol and arrogance, refused to leave. "Come on, Kev," Noelle slurred, swaying slightly. "Don't be like that. We're all friends here, right?" Kevin said nothing. He turned and walked to the garage, his movements deliberate and controlled. When he returned, he was holding a baseball bat. Noelle's eyes widened. He stumbled backward, nearly tripping over his own feet in his haste to get away. Kevin watched, bat in hand, as Noelle ran down the driveway and disappeared into the night. The remaining guests left in stunned silence, shooting worried glances over their shoulders as they hurried to their cars. In the aftermath, Kevin sat at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. Miranda had stormed off to their bedroom, slamming the door behind her. Zach had retreated to his room as well, leaving Kevin alone with his thoughts. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he pored over financial records, bank statements, and credit card bills. By the time the sun rose, casting its pale light through the kitchen windows, Kevin had a clear picture of what had been happening under his nose. Miranda stumbled into the kitchen around 9 a.m., her hair disheveled and her eyes bloodshot. She made a beeline for the coffee pot, pointedly ignoring Kevin. "What's all this?" she asked finally, gesturing at the papers spread across the table. Kevin's voice was ice when he responded. Divorce papers. I've already called my lawyer. Miranda's hangover seemed to evaporate instantly. She sneered at him, her pretty features twisting into something ugly. You think it'll be that easy? I'll take you for everything you're worth. I wouldn't count on that, Kevin replied, sliding over a stack of financial records. I've been tracking your errands and Noel's sudden influx of cash. Embezzlement's a serious crime, Miranda. The color drained from Miranda's face. For a moment, fear flashed in her eyes. But then her mask of defiance slipped back into place. You can't prove anything. Kevin's smile was wolfish. Watch me. Miranda opened her mouth to retort, but was cut off by the sound of the front door slamming open. Noel burst into the kitchen, his face red with anger. You threatening Miranda, Kevin? Big mistake, Noel growled. Kevin stood his ground, squaring his shoulders. Despite the turmoil of the past 24 hours, he felt oddly calm. The mistake was yours, Noel. Both of you. Noel lunged forward, throwing a wild punch. But Kevin, hardened by years of physical labor on construction sites, easily deflected the blow. In one smooth motion, he grabbed Noel's arm and twisted it behind his back, forcing the other man to his knees. Listen carefully, Kevin said, his voice low and deadly calm. I've got evidence of your little scheme. You've got one chance to come clean, or I'm taking it all to the police. From the doorway, Miranda watched the scene unfold. The gravity of their situation was finally sinking in. She had gambled everything on this affair, on the promise of excitement and wealth that Noel had dangled in front of her. Now, faced with the consequences of her actions, she realized just how badly she had miscalculated. Kevin released Noel, who scrambled to his feet, rubbing his sore arm. The two men stared at each other, the air thick with tension. You've got 24 hours, Kevin said. After that, I start making phone calls. To the police. To your boss. To everyone. Noel glanced at Miranda, panic evident in his eyes. Without another word, he turned and fled from the house. In the silence that followed, Kevin turned to his wife. The woman he had loved, trusted, built a life with. Now, looking at her, he felt nothing but contempt. I want you out of this house by tomorrow, he said. You can stay with your sister, or with Loverboy for all I care. But you're not staying here. What about Zach? Miranda asked, her voice small. Zach stays with me, Kevin replied. Unless you want to explain to a judge why an embezzler and adulterer should have custody. Miranda's shoulders slumped in defeat. Without another word, she turned and headed upstairs to pack her things. Kevin sat back down at the kitchen table, surrounded by the evidence of his wife's betrayal. He felt drained, but also strangely liberated. The truth was out now. He heard footsteps on the stairs and looked up to see Zach enter the kitchen. The boy's eyes were red-rimmed, his face pale. Without a word, Kevin stood and pulled his son into a tight embrace. As they stood there in the kitchen, the morning sun streaming through the windows, Kevin felt a glimmer of hope. His marriage was over, his trust shattered, but he still had his son. He still had his integrity, and he had the truth. Whatever came next, he would face it head-on, just like he always had. Kevin's mind raced as he tried to process the events of the past 24 hours. He needed a plan, a way to protect himself and Zach from the fallout of Miranda and Noel's betrayal. Zach, he said, his voice gentle but firm. I need you to tell me everything you know. When did this start? What have you seen or heard? Zach slumped into a kitchen chair, a gesture so like Kevin's own that it made his heart ache. It's been going on for months, Dad. At least 6, maybe more. I started noticing little things at first. Mom being on her phone all the time, laughing at texts. Then I overheard a phone call one night when you were working late. Kevin nodded, encouraging his son to continue. She was talking about money, about how they needed to be careful. I didn't understand at first, but then I saw Noel leaving the house early one morning when you were out of town for that big project in Roanoke. Kevin's fists clenched at his sides, but he kept his voice steady. You did good, son. I know it must have been hard, keeping this to yourself. Zach looked up, his eyes shining with unshed tears. I wanted to tell you, Dad. I really did. But Mom, she said it would destroy you, destroy our family. She said it was just a phase, that it would be over soon. Kevin placed a hand on Zach's shoulder, squeezing gently. This isn't your fault, Zach. None of it. Your mother and Noelle made their choices. We're going to get through this together, okay? Zach nodded, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. What happens now? Kevin sighed, looking at the pile of documents on the table. Now, we protect ourselves. I'm going to call my lawyer again, get the ball rolling on the divorce. We might need to talk to the police about the embezzlement. But first, I need you to do something for me. Anything, Dad. I need you to write down everything you remember. Dates, times, conversations you overheard. Anything that might be important. Can you do that for me? Zach nodded, a determined look crossing his face. I can do that. I want to help. Kevin managed a small smile. That's my boy. Now, why don't you go upstairs and get started on that? I need to make a few phone calls. As Zach headed upstairs, Kevin pulled out his cell phone. He dialed a number he knew by heart, waiting as it rang. Stanley? It's Kevin. We need to talk. There's been a situation, and it might affect the company. Can you meet me at the office in an hour? After hanging up, Kevin took a deep breath. He looked around the kitchen, at the remnants of his birthday party still scattered about. It felt like a lifetime ago. Upstairs, he could hear Miranda moving around, presumably packing her things. Part of him wanted to confront her again, to demand answers, to make her feel even a fraction of the pain he was feeling. But he knew it would be pointless. She had made her choice. Instead, he focused on what needed to be done. He gathered the financial records he'd been reviewing, placing them carefully in his briefcase. Then, he headed upstairs to change. As he passed the guest room, he saw Miranda stuffing clothes into a suitcase. She looked up as he paused in the doorway, her eyes red and puffy. Kevin, please, she started, her voice trembling. Can't we talk about this? 17 years of marriage has to count for something. Kevin felt a surge of anger, but he pushed it down. When he spoke, his voice was cold and controlled. You're right, Miranda. 17 years does count for something. It counts for alimony, and it counts for how the judge will view your infidelity and embezzlement. Beyond that, it means nothing. Miranda flinched as if he'd struck her. You don't mean that. We can work this out. I made a mistake. I know that. But I love you, Kevin. I love our family. Kevin laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. Love? Is that what you call fucking our neighbor and stealing from my company? Save your lies, Miranda. I'm not interested. He turned to leave, but Miranda's voice stopped him. What about Zach? Are you going to turn his mother into a criminal? Is that what's best for him? Kevin felt his control slipping. He spun around, his eyes blazing. Don't you dare use Zach as a shield. You didn't think about what was best for him when you were screwing Noelle in our bed. You didn't think about him when you were embezzling money that could have sent him to college. You don't get to play the concerned mother now. Miranda recoiled, tears streaming down her face. But Kevin felt no sympathy. He'd cried his own tears last night, alone in the dark. Now, he was done crying. Now, he was angry. I'm going to the office, he said, his voice cold. I expect you to be gone when I get back. If you need more time, you can come back tomorrow when I'm at work. But as of now, you no longer live here. Without waiting for a response, Kevin turned and walked away. He stopped by Zach's room, knocking softly on the door. Come in, Zach called. Kevin opened the door to find his son sitting at his desk, scribbling furiously in a notebook. I'm heading to the office for a bit. Will you be okay here alone? Zach nodded, looking up from his writing. Yeah, Dad. I'll be fine. Are you okay? Kevin managed a small smile. I will be, son. We both will be. It's going to be tough for a while, but we'll get through it. Zach stood up and hugged his father tightly. Kevin returned the embrace, feeling a lump form in his throat. When they pulled apart, both their eyes were moist. I'll be back soon, Kevin said, ruffling Zach's hair. Call me if you need anything, okay? As Kevin drove to the office, his mind was already working on the next steps. He'd need to secure the company's finances, make sure Miranda couldn't access any more funds. He'd need to start documenting everything for the divorce proceedings. and he'd need to figure out how to move forward, how to rebuild his life from the ashes of betrayal. It wouldn't be easy, but Kevin Sawyer had never shied away from hard work. He'd built his career with his own two hands, climbing the ranks from apprentice to foreman to project manager. He'd faced this challenge the same way he faced every other, head-on, with determination and grit. As he pulled into the parking lot of his office building, Kevin took a deep breath. The man who walked out of this car would not be the same one who had celebrated his birthday yesterday. That man was gone, along with the life he thought he had. But in his place stood someone stronger. Someone who wouldn't be fooled again. Someone who would fight for what was his, and for the future he and Zach deserved. Kevin grabbed his briefcase, squared his shoulders, and walked into the building. The battle was just beginning. Kevin Sawyer stepped onto the construction site, the familiar smell of sawdust and concrete filling his nostrils. It was a welcome distraction from the chaos of his personal life. Here, he was in control. Here, he knew exactly what needed to be done. Or so he thought. "Sawyer," a voice called out. Kevin turned to see Stanley Humphrey, the company owner, striding towards him. The older man's face was etched with worry lines. "We've got a problem," Stanley said without preamble. "Bullock Construction is suing us. They're claiming we stole their proprietary designs for the Riverside project." Kevin felt his stomach drop. The Riverside project was their biggest contract to date. If they lost it, the company would be in serious trouble. And as project manager, the blame would fall squarely on his shoulders. "That's impossible," Kevin said, his mind racing. "We developed those designs in-house. I oversaw the entire process myself." Stanley nodded grimly. "I know that, and you know that. But Bullock's got some pretty convincing evidence. If we can't disprove their claims, we're looking at a multi-million-dollar lawsuit. And that's not even considering the damage to our reputation." Kevin's jaw clenched. He'd be damned if he'd let this company, his company, go down because of some baseless accusation. "Give me everything we've got on Bullock and this lawsuit. I'll figure this out." As Stanley walked away, Kevin's phone buzzed. A text from Miranda. "We need to talk about the divorce. And the house. And Zach." Kevin ignored the message without responding. He had bigger problems to deal with right now. Over the next few days, Kevin threw himself into researching Bullock Construction and their CEO, Francisco Bullock. He pored over financial reports, court records, and industry gossip. Slowly, a picture began to emerge. Francisco Bullock was a man with a history of frivolous lawsuits, to be exact. Kevin found case after case where Bullock had sued smaller companies, usually settling out of court for substantial sums. It was a pattern, a business strategy disguised as legal action. As Kevin dug deeper, he uncovered something even more interesting. Bullock Construction was in financial trouble. Their last few projects had gone over budget, and they were bleeding money. This lawsuit wasn't just about stealing designs. It was a desperate attempt to stay afloat. Kevin smiled grimly as he compiled his findings. Bullock had picked the wrong company to mess with this time. Meanwhile, across town, Miranda and Noel were having a very different conversation. "We need to do something," Miranda hissed, pacing back and forth in Noel's small apartment. "Kevin's going to take everything in the divorce. We need to weaken his position." Noel lounged on the couch, looking unconcerned. "Relax, babe. We've got the embezzlement stuff on our side. He can't prove anything without implicating himself." Miranda shot him a withering look. "You don't know Kevin like I do. He's not going to back down. We need to hit him where it hurts." At work, a slow smile spread across Noel's face. "I might have an idea about that." The next day, Miranda walked into Sawyer Construction's main office, her head held high. She ignored the whispers and stares from the employees who knew her as Kevin's wife. Ex-wife, she reminded herself. "I need to speak with Stanley Humphrey," she told the receptionist. "It's urgent." 10 minutes later, she was seated across from Stanley, her face a mask of concern. "I'm worried about Kevin," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "He's been unstable lately, drinking too much, flying into rages." Stanley's brow furrowed. "That doesn't sound like Kevin." Miranda leaned forward, her eyes wide. "I know. That's why I'm so concerned. I think the stress of the job might be getting to him." I'm afraid he might do something drastic. As Miranda spun her tale, she could see doubt creeping into Stanley's eyes. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Across town, Noel was putting his own plan into action. He'd managed to get his hands on a set of keys to the construction site office. Now, under cover of darkness, he slipped inside. His target was Kevin's computer. If he could plant some incriminating documents, maybe some correspondence with Bullock Construction, it would be enough to cast doubt on Kevin's innocence in the lawsuit. Noel booted up the computer, his fingers flying over the keyboard. But as he tried to access Kevin's files, he hit a wall. Extra security measures, ones he hadn't anticipated. After several failed attempts, he was forced to retreat, empty-handed and frustrated. What Noel didn't know was that Kevin had been one step ahead. Anticipating some kind of sabotage, he'd beefed up the security on all his work devices. As Noel left the office, a silent alert pinged on Kevin's phone, along with a crystal-clear image from the hidden camera he'd installed. Kevin allowed himself a small smile. Let them play their games. He was gathering all the evidence he needed. The next week, Kevin stood before the company's legal team, his research spread out before him. "Gentlemen," he began, "I think you'll find this interesting." Over the next hour, Kevin laid out everything he'd uncovered about Francisco Bullock and his company. The history of frivolous lawsuits, the financial troubles, the desperate need for a big payout. "But here's the kicker," Kevin said, pulling out a final document. "I've uncovered evidence of some highly unethical practices at Bullock Construction. Corners cut on safety measures. Substandard materials used to save costs. If this information were to come to light, it would destroy their reputation in the industry." The lead lawyer leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. "This is excellent work, Kevin. With this, we can not only defend against their lawsuit, but potentially countersue for defamation." As Kevin left the meeting, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He'd done it. He'd saved the company, and his job along with it. But his relief was short-lived. As he walked to his car, he saw a familiar figure lurking near the entrance. Noel. Kevin's fists clenched at his sides, but he forced himself to remain calm. He wouldn't give Noel the satisfaction of seeing him lose control. "What are you doing here?" Kevin asked, his voice cold. Noel smirked, but Kevin could see the nervousness in his eyes. "Just passing by. Thought I'd say hello to an old friend." "We're not friends," Kevin said flatly. "And if I catch you anywhere near this site again, I'll have you arrested for trespassing." Noel's smirk faltered. "You can't prove anything, Sawyer. You've got nothing on us." Kevin leaned in close, his voice a low growl. "I've got more than you know. Now get out of here before I decide to share some of that information with the police." As Noel scurried away, Kevin allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. He was winning this battle on all fronts. The next day, the news broke. Francisco Bullock had been arrested on charges of fraud and safety violations. Sawyer Construction's countersuit had brought all of Bullock's misdeeds to light. In the aftermath, Kevin found himself in Stanley's office once again. But this time, the older man was smiling. "You've done an incredible job, Kevin," Stanley said. "You saved this company from a potentially ruinous lawsuit, and in the process, you've shown leadership skills I didn't know you had." Kevin nodded, accepting the praise. "Thank you, sir. I was just doing my job." Stanley leaned forward, his expression serious. "I think it's time we discussed your future with this company. How would you feel about taking on more responsibility? Say, as vice president of operations?" Kevin felt a surge of pride. This was what he'd been working towards for years. "I'd be honored, sir." As Kevin left Stanley's office, his new title ringing in his ears, he couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. He'd faced challenges on all fronts, personal and professional, and he'd come out on top. But as he drove home, his thoughts turned to Miranda and Noel. They'd been quiet lately, too quiet. Kevin knew them well enough to know they wouldn't give up easily. They'd be planning something desperate. Well, let them try, Kevin thought. He was ready for whatever they might throw at him next. As he pulled into his driveway, Kevin saw Zach sitting on the front porch, waiting for him. The sight of his son brought a genuine smile to his face. No matter what happened with Miranda and Noel, no matter what challenges he faced at work, he had Zach. And that was what really mattered. Kevin got out of the car, ready to share his good news with his son. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. Across town, in Noel's dingy apartment, Miranda paced back and forth, her face a mask of fury. "Did you see the news?" she spat. "That bastard not only beat the lawsuit, but he got Francisco arrested. And now he's been promoted." Noel lounged on the couch, his usual smirk replaced by a scowl. "Calm down, babe. We'll figure something out." Miranda whirled on him, her eyes flashing. "Calm down? Calm down? We're losing everything, Noel. The money, the house, my son. And you want me to calm down?" Noel stood up, grabbing Miranda's arms. "Listen to me. We're not done yet. We've still got one more card to play." Miranda looked at him, a mix of desperation and hope in her eyes. "What are you talking about?" Noel's grin was ugly. "We're going to make Kevin look like the bad guy. And I've got just the plan to do it." As Noel outlined his scheme, Miranda felt a chill run down her spine. It was risky, potentially dangerous. But what choice did they have? Kevin had outmaneuvered them at every turn. This was their last chance to turn the tables. "Okay," Miranda said finally. "Let's do it." As the sun set over the city, three people in different locations prepared for the battles to come. Kevin, confident but wary, ready to protect what was his. Miranda and Noel, desperate and dangerous, willing to risk everything on one final gambit. The stage was set for a showdown that would change all their lives forever. Noel Morrison paced the dingy living room of his apartment, his face a mask of desperation. The cheap laminate flooring creaked under his feet with each pass. Miranda sat on the threadbare couch, her once perfect manicure now chipped and ragged. They'd been plotting for hours, fueled by cheap whiskey and cheaper promises. "It's gotta be perfect," Noel muttered. "One slip up and we're done." Miranda nodded, her eyes hard. "Kevin's smart. He'll be expecting something." Noel's lips curled into a sneer. "Yeah, well, he won't be expecting this. You remember the plan?" "Of course I remember," Miranda snapped. "I'm not an idiot." Noel stopped pacing and fixed her with a hard stare. "Could have fooled me. If you hadn't been so careless with the embezzlement." "Oh, don't you dare pin this all on me," Miranda hissed, standing up. "You were more than happy to take the money when it was rolling in." Noel waved her off. "Water under the bridge. We need to focus on what's next." The plan was simple, in theory. Frame Kevin for assault. Noel would rough himself up, Miranda would corroborate the story, and Kevin would find himself on the wrong side of the law. With a criminal record, his cushy new job would vanish, along with any leverage in the divorce proceedings. "You sure you can sell this?" Noel asked, eyeing Miranda skeptically. Miranda's laugh was bitter. "Please. I've been acting the part of the loving wife for years. This'll be a cakewalk." What they didn't know was that Kevin was already 10 steps ahead. Kevin Sawyer sat in his home office, surrounded by screens. He'd installed hidden cameras throughout the house weeks ago, a precaution born of years dealing with shady contractors and even shadier lawyers. Now, those cameras were his ace in the hole. He watched as Noel stumbled into view, Miranda close behind. They were arguing, their voices muffled but their body language clear. Kevin leaned closer, his eyes narrowing as he saw Noel begin to hit himself, creating bruises that would later be blamed on Kevin. "Amateurs," Kevin muttered, a grim smile playing on his lips. He picked up his phone and dialed a familiar number. "Jack? It's Kevin. I think it's time to put our plan into action." The next day, Kevin was unsurprised to find 2 police officers at his door. What did surprise him was the sight of Zach, standing behind them, his young face a mixture of confusion and fear. "Mr. Sawyer," one of the officers said, his voice professionally neutral. "We need to ask you some questions about an alleged assault." Kevin nodded, stepping aside to let them in. "Of course, officers. I've been expecting you." As they settled in the living room, Kevin caught Zach's eye. "It's okay, son," he said softly. "This will all be over soon." The questioning was brief but intense. The officers relayed Noel's story of a violent confrontation, corroborated by Miranda's tearful testimony. Kevin listened in silence, his face impassive. "Mr. Sawyer," the lead officer said, "Mr. Morrison claims you attacked him last night, unprovoked." He has the injuries to back up his story, and your wife has corroborated his account. Do you have anything to say about these allegations? Kevin leaned forward, his voice calm. Officers, I appreciate you doing your job, but I think there's something you need to see. He led them to his office, Zach trailing behind. With a few keystrokes, the screens came to life, showing crystal-clear footage of Noelle and Miranda's clumsy attempt at deception. The officers watched in stunned silence. When the video ended, the lead officer turned to Kevin. Mr. Sawyer, I think we owe you an apology. Kevin waved it off. No need. You were doing your job. But I would like to press charges against Mr. Morrison and my soon-to-be ex-wife for filing a false report. As the officers left, promising to return with warrants, Zach looked at his father with a mixture of awe and respect. Dad, how did you know? Kevin put a hand on his son's shoulder. I've learned to always be prepared, Zach, especially when dealing with people like your mother and Noelle. But the cameras, isn't that like invasion of privacy or something? Kevin sighed. It's my house, son, and given what they were planning, I'd say it was justified. Sometimes you have to fight fire with fire. Across town, Miranda and Noelle were celebrating their perceived victory with cheap champagne when the doorbell rang. Their smiles faded as they opened the door to find not only the police but Kevin himself, flanked by his lawyer. What's going on? Miranda demanded, her voice shrill. Kevin's smile was cold. Justice, Miranda. Pure and simple. As the officers read Miranda and Noelle their rights, Kevin's lawyer stepped forward, producing a thick folder. Mr. Sawyer has some things he'd like to discuss with you both. Inside, Kevin laid out the evidence methodically. The camera footage, bank statements showing the embezzled funds, emails detailing their plots and schemes. With each new piece of damning information, Miranda and Noelle seemed to shrink, their bravado evaporating. You've got nothing, Noelle sneered, but his voice lacked conviction. Kevin reached into his briefcase and pulled out a USB drive. This contains everything, he said calmly. Every transaction, every lie, every scheme. You have two choices. Confess and face the consequences, or I take this to the police. Miranda, who had been silent until now, suddenly broke down. Kevin, please, she sobbed. We can work this out. For Zach's sake. Kevin's eyes flashed with anger. Don't you dare use our son as a shield, Miranda. You lost that right when you chose to betray us both. But he needs his mother. Miranda wailed. He needs stability and honesty. Kevin shot back. Two things you seem incapable of providing. Noelle, seeing the writing on the wall, turned on Miranda. It was all her idea, he blurted. She came to me, said she was unhappy. I never meant for it to go this far. Miranda's sobs turned to shrieks of rage. You bastard. After everything we've been through, you're going to throw me under the bus? Enough. Kevin's voice cut through the chaos. You're both going down for this. The only question is how hard you want to fall. As Miranda and Noelle turned on each other, Kevin stood and nodded to the officers. I think we're done here, he said quietly. They're all yours. In the weeks that followed, the truth came to light in a very public way. Noelle was arrested for embezzlement, his reputation in the community shattered beyond repair. Miranda, facing the consequences of her actions, lost any chance at custody of Zach and forfeited all claims to Kevin's assets. Kevin found himself in a meeting with Stanley Humphrey, the company owner. Stanley leaned back in his chair, a pleased expression on his face. Kevin, I've got to hand it to you, Stanley said. The way you handled the Bullock lawsuit was impressive enough, but the grace you've shown under personal pressure, that's the kind of strength we need in our top leadership. Kevin raised an eyebrow. What are you saying, Stanley? I'm saying, how would you like to be our new chief operations officer? Corner office, substantial pay raise, the works. Kevin felt a surge of pride, but kept his expression neutral. I'd be honored, Stanley. Thank you for the opportunity. As he left Stanley's office, Kevin allowed himself a small smile. He'd weathered the storm, both personal and professional, and come out stronger for it. But for all his professional success, it was his personal life that gave Kevin the most satisfaction. He and Zach grew closer than ever, bonding over shared meals and long talks on the porch of their home. One evening, as they sat watching the sunset, Zach turned to his father. Dad, I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner about Mom and Noel. Kevin put a hand on his son's shoulder, squeezing gently. You did the right thing in the end, Zach. That's what matters. Zach was quiet for a moment, then asked, Do you think Mom will ever change? Kevin sighed, choosing his words carefully. I don't know, son. People can change, but they have to want to. Your mother. She's got a lot to work through. Are you angry with her? Kevin thought about it. I was at first. Now, I'm just disappointed. But that's not something you need to worry about. Your job is to focus on school, on your friends, on growing up to be the best man you can be. Zach nodded, then surprised Kevin by leaning in for a hug. Thanks, Dad, for everything. As the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Kevin allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. He had faced betrayal with strength, overcome challenges with intelligence, and emerged not just victorious, but respected and whole. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be tough conversations with Zach, therapy sessions to work through the trauma of the past months. The divorce proceedings would drag on, a constant reminder of what had been lost. But as Kevin sat there with his son, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in years. He had survived the storm and come out stronger on the other side. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them head-on, just as he always had. The next morning, Kevin woke early, his mind already racing with plans for the day ahead. As he made coffee, Zach stumbled into the kitchen, bleary-eyed and yawning. Morning, champ, Kevin said, sliding a plate of toast across the counter. Sleep okay? Zach shrugged. I guess. Had some weird dreams. Kevin nodded sympathetically. Want to talk about it? For a moment, it looked like Zach might refuse. Then, haltingly, he began to speak. I dreamed about Mom. She was crying, saying she was sorry. But then she turned into this monster. And Noel was there, laughing. Kevin set down his coffee cup, giving Zach his full attention. That sounds pretty intense. How did it make you feel? Scared. Angry. I don't know. Zach pushed his toast around the plate. Dad, do you think I'll ever be able to trust Mom again? Kevin took a deep breath. This was the kind of conversation he'd been preparing for, but it still wasn't easy. That's up to you, Zach. Trust is earned, not given. If your mom wants to rebuild that trust, she'll have to work at it. But you're not obligated to give her that chance if you're not ready. Zach nodded slowly. I think I need some time. Is that okay? Of course it is, Kevin said firmly. You take all the time you need. And remember, I'm always here if you want to talk. As Zach headed off to school, Kevin felt a mixture of pride and sadness. His son was growing up faster than he'd ever imagined, forced to confront adult realities far too soon. But he was handling it with a maturity that amazed Kevin. Later that day, Kevin sat in his new corner office, reviewing quarterly reports. A knock at the door interrupted his concentration. Come in, he called. To his surprise, it was Miranda who entered. She looked different, thinner, paler, with dark circles under her eyes. The confident, polished woman he'd married was nowhere to be seen. Kevin, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I need to talk to you. Kevin leaned back in his chair, his face impassive. I thought my lawyer made it clear. Any communication needs to go through him. Miranda nodded, wringing her hands. I know. But this isn't about the divorce or anything legal. It's about Zach. Despite himself, Kevin felt a flicker of concern. What about Zach? I want to see him, Miranda said quickly, as if afraid she'd lose her nerve. I know I don't have any right to ask, but he's my son, Kevin. I miss him. Kevin was quiet for a long moment, studying the woman before him. Finally, he spoke. You're right. You don't have any right to ask. But Zach is old enough to make his own decisions. If he wants to see you, I won't stand in the way. Miranda's eyes filled with tears. Thank you, Kevin. I know I don't deserve. You're right. Kevin cut her off, his voice hard. You don't. But this isn't about you, or me. It's about what's best for Zach. I'll talk to him, see how he feels. That's the best I can offer. Miranda nodded, looking both grateful and ashamed. As she turned to leave, Kevin called out, "Miranda?" She paused at the door, looking back. "Get help," Kevin said simply. "For Zach's sake, if not your own." After she left, Kevin sat back in his chair, lost in thought. He'd meant what he said. This was Zach's decision to make. But he couldn't help feeling a mix of emotions. Anger at Miranda's audacity, concern for Zach's well-being, and, buried deep beneath it all, a tiny flicker of something that might have been hope. Not for reconciliation. That ship had long since sailed. But for healing. For all of them. As the day drew to a close, Kevin packed up his things and headed home. The house was quiet when he arrived, Zach not yet back from his after-school activities. Kevin used the time to start dinner, falling into the familiar rhythm of chopping vegetables and seasoning meat. When Zach arrived, they sat down to eat, sharing stories about their day. Kevin waited until they were nearly finished before broaching the subject of Miranda's visit. "Your mom came to see me today," he said carefully, watching Zach's reaction. Zach's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Oh," he said quietly. What did she want?" Kevin took a deep breath. "She wants to see you. But I told her it's your decision. You don't have to if you're not ready." Zach was quiet for a long moment, pushing food around his plate. Finally, he looked up. "Can I think about it?" "Of course," Kevin said, relief evident in his voice. "Take all the time you need. There's no rush." Later that night, as Kevin lay in bed, he reflected on the day's events. The challenges weren't over, far from it. But for the first time in months, he felt like they were moving forward instead of just treading water. Whatever came next, he and Zach would face it together. And that, Kevin realized, was all that really mattered.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy the story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
My name is Jack Taylor, and this is my story. Being married to Mira was a whirlwind. Equal parts thrilling, maddening, and heartbreaking. In our 2 years together, I never truly felt married. Sure, I felt the weight of commitment, but Mira? She seemed untethered by it. Her priorities revolved around her figure, her wardrobe, her green card, earning a master's degree, and making money. The one thing missing from her list was me. I was never more than a footnote in her grand plan. Mira is 5 feet 4 inches, with striking blonde hair, a tiny waist, flawless Middle Eastern Eurasian skin, green eyes, and a 36 C-frame. She radiates a raw sensuality that makes men revert to primal instincts. But for Mira, sex wasn't an expression of intimacy. It was a weapon, a tool for manipulating every man in her orbit. Do I miss her personality? Not at all. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't miss how she could set the bedroom on fire. She had an unbridled lust, a willingness to try nearly anything, and I was completely hooked. Yet, even in our most intimate moments, I never felt genuine affection or love from her. In hindsight, I can't recall her ever saying, "I love you." It simply wasn't part of her vocabulary or our so-called relationship. Looking back now, there wasn't a real relationship at all. We were just going through the motions, living in a cold, hollow facade. I had been stuck in an ice castle, too blind to see it. It took a hard wake-up call, a figurative slap to the face, to finally pull my head out of the fog. She never wanted slow, passionate lovemaking. She didn't want foreplay. She wanted it hard and raw. The animalistic sex was plentiful. I often longed for the emotional intimacy she denied me. Mira never gave me a hug or a cuddle. She used my body and I used hers. The difference being that I loved her. She never loved me. I was able to take care of her needs, but not a lot of her wants. I went into some serious debt trying. We ate out so much my oven was dusty. I'm a high school teacher. I make a decent living, but I'll never be rich. I did my best. There was no way I could hang with the country club set. It was not enough for her. The greedy bitch. When I met her 4 years ago, she was a nanny. I was immediately impressed with her beauty and intelligence. She was exotic and independent. I later discovered that what I thought was independence was really a manifestation of her self-centered manipulating personality. From the beginning, she was egotistical and selfish. I always saw better in her than actually existed. I felt like a moth that was irresistibly drawn to the flame that would kill him. Don't ask me why. I should have kicked her to the curb after the first week I met her. I guess I wanted to, needed to see the good in her. Maybe I was thinking with the wrong head. I wish there had been a way for me to keep the lower half of her and get rid of rest of her. So, the obvious question is why I put up with her manipulating, callous, and deceitful ways for so long? Until recently, I never thought of myself as a chicken. Looking back, I guess I was. Somehow, I thought of my patience and tolerance as strength. I promised her father, in Turkey, that I would provide for and protect his daughter. It was important to me that I kept my word. I've always thought that he was a good and honorable man who had no idea who his daughter really is. I was raising twin sons from a previous disaster called a marriage and did not want to be divorced again. I was determined to make my train wreck of a relationship work. When I met Mira, all I wanted was a home and a woman to come home to more than anything. I guess I saw what I wanted to see until I had no choice. I don't want to argue, Jack. It's over between us. You know that, she said, as she dressed to leave our house on a recent Friday night. I need to be with my friends. You mean your boyfriend? I heard most of your conversation on the phone this morning. If he calls my house again, I will throw you and your phone out of the window. Don't get jealous. You know we can't stay together. I am not jealous. You said you wanted to pursue your own life 4 months ago. Why are you still here? You being here does not allow me to get on with my life. My patience with you is finished. I have been tested enough. Don't worry, I'll be gone soon. She looked stunning. Her full red lips, perfume, and sexy black dress left little to the imagination. She was going to meet another man and didn't care that I knew about it. I had always been gentle and kind to her, but that was about to change. His disrespect for me and my sons was intolerable. I knew that I still cared a little about her. I also knew that I had reached my limit. Mira and her boyfriend were going to find out that there would be a price to pay for their treachery and disrespect. My anger grew as I watched her. What has gotten into you? What did I do to deserve this treatment? Did you think I was going to tolerate this crap? Your social life has always been more important than your husband? I have put up with your shit for too long. You've been lying to me for a long time. I know what you've been doing. Tonight, I can't deny it anymore. You treat me and my sons like crap. You really bank on the promise I made to your father that I would protect you from harm. Somehow, my sense of honor and love for you has been turned against me. You have never helped pay a single bill. I supported you as you struggled to get your MBA and through a number of nothing jobs. Now that you've got yourself a big-time job in an investment bank, I'm not good enough for you. Is that it? I could feel my guts boiling. I hate being around your scumsucker sons. I hate it every time I see them. Every time you wrote a child support check, I wanted to puke. Now they are here, and I don't want to be their mother. Besides, you have no sophistication. You're just a simple man who wants a simple life. I need more than you can give, she said, with an indifference and coldness that could not be ignored. She really thought she was somehow superior to me. Bitch, my sons are not scumsuckers, and if you are wise, you will not call them that name again. You have 1 week from today to get your stuff out of my house. If you and your possessions are not gone at that time, I will put all of it in the garbage. After next Friday, you will not be allowed in my house. I will no longer be held captive by the promise that I made to your father. We are finished. I can't stand the sight of you. I was glad that my sons were with my sister for a couple of weeks. They didn't need to be exposed to her another second. I felt ashamed and embarrassed that I ever exposed them to the monster I was looking at. She looked shocked. She was beginning to realize that I had changed. I was not going to take care of her needs anymore. My stomach felt twisted. It felt like I had been gunshot. I hated myself for still feeling anything for her. I wanted to hurt her. At the same time, I grieved for the love that never was, except in my mind. Despite my complete hatred of what she was doing and who she really was, I felt a strange bond with her. It wasn't love. That had been dying slowly for a long time. I felt sorry for her, even though she only deserved my contempt. I truly believed she would end up the victim of her own karma. Her treachery deserved none of my sympathy. I've had enough of your disrespect. And when did you get to be the queen? I'd just like to know, why do you hate them and me so much? You think that you're superior to me, to us. In fact, you're a two-bit hooker who doesn't deserve to breathe the same air as myself or my sons, bitch. Their bitch of a mother dumped them on you, and you dumped them on me. You never have any money. You spend all of your time and income on them. I don't hate you. I don't know how I feel about you. Some part of me still cares about you. But I don't love you, Jack. I need the finer things in life. I deserve that. I never should have married a man with children. I need a man who can give me his full attention, she said, picking up her purse. The only reason I married you was to get a green card and live rent-free until I could arrange my life, and when I needed your dick or anything else, you always said yes. Sorry, dear, she said, mockingly. She had no idea that I was recording the conversation. You've got a lot of nerve calling somebody a 304. You are more of a 304 than my ex ever was. I can't remember you ever trying to be in their lives. You haven't been a wife and definitely not a mother. The days of obliging you are over. From now on, you can take care of yourself. You are as plastic as the fancy cars and restaurants that you love so much. You knew from the beginning my ex left me in a pile of debt. I pay the mortgage, buy the food and everything else. Did you never try to help me? Did you? I said, raising my voice. All you have done since I married you was spending my money. Why did you really marry me? I didn't really expect an answer. I don't have a lot of cash because I have paid your bills. You have never contributed 1 cent to this household. Have you ever been denied anything that you needed since we've been together? You have served your purpose. In a short while, I will have my green card. I have my education and now a great profession. I don't need you anymore. Sorry. I know that's cold. It's the way things are. I might miss your love making a little, but not much. He is bigger than you. She was smiling. What was that about? She was driving the nail deeper. It took all of my martial arts training not to lash out at her. I wanted to wring her neck and throw her in the street. I decided not to let her bait me. Did you ever love me? She looked at me with an evil grin, but didn't answer. I could tell she didn't want to set me off before she was ready to go. The look on her face was my answer. Then, I heard a car horn blow in front of my door. You are one sick piece of work. You're lucky I haven't thrown you in the street months ago, I said, feeling sad and exhausted. Don't wait up. I probably won't be back tonight, she said sarcastically. The doorbell rang. The son of a bitch had the nerve to come to my front door. I opened it. Is Mira here? He asked with a smirk on his face. So, you're the guy who can't control his bitch, he said, brushing past me, entering my house. Mira came downstairs and approached the door with a smug look on her face. She stood close to Max. I had found out his name was Max Brown. He was engaged to a rich, divorced woman who had 2 kids. I wondered if Mira knew that. My loving husband just threatened me. He told me I have 1 week to get out. What do you think about that, Max? She asked her date. I think I should kick his butt right now for upsetting you, he said, looking at me. I would like for you to try that, Max, preferably in front of witnesses. It would be a shame to make your fiancée a widow before she was married. It would be my pleasure to punish you in front of witnesses and teach you some respect, I said calmly, with the smile of predator stalking his kill. He had a confused look on his face. My confidence rattled his confidence. Myra's expression didn't change. She obviously already knew of Max's impending marriage. I figured they had a plan to relieve his fiancée her of her funds, another scam. Those two deserved each other. I decided to screw up their plans. Never mind him, Max. Let's go. He's had a little martial arts training and thinks he's a tough guy. Don't waste your strength on him. Besides, I want him to sit here and think about you screwing me. Another time, chicken. Another time, he said, puffing himself up. I started to tell her to stay gone. I realized I needed time to exact my revenge. A few more days were all I needed. I decided not to hurt him at that moment. He was not worth getting arrested for. Apparently, Mira didn't tell him that I am proficient in the Filipino martial art of Kali, the art of combat at close quarters. She chose to denigrate my skills. I wondered why. He was taller than me by about 4 and about 20 pounds heavier. I knew that made him feel overconfident. It was hard to resist the urge to cut him down like a tree. My day would come. He leaned toward me and whispered, "Did she tell you that I screwed her in your bed?" he said, daring me to respond. "Did the bitch make you take a number, or did you stand in line?" He moved toward me. Mira pulled him away. Lucky for him. Sooner or later, his butt was mine. I watched as his Lexus pulled away from the curb. I knew his name, address, telephone number, and place of employment. He was her supervisor at her bank. I had collected a ton of their smutty emails and had pictures of them in various compromising positions in public places. Mira liked the thrill of pretending to be his submissive hooker in public. There's no doubt in my mind, she was setting him up for the kill as she had done to me. I wondered what her father would say when he saw my pictures. I never wanted to hurt her. Her treatment of me and my sons was deliberately cruel. It was past time that I made sure she couldn't inflict any more pain on them or me. The twins were 4 years old. They could never understand why Mira didn't like them. I hated myself for exposing them to her poison as long as I did. They came to me full-time a couple of years ago when their mother dropped them off and disappeared. It was difficult to convince them. It was not their fault. Myra's refusal to spend time around them turned into a good thing. I was able to devote my time in being the best father I could. We were very close and they were the center of my life. My wife and her piece of crap boyfriend had to pay. It was not normal for me to be vindictive. I decided to allow myself to use retribution to assuage my pain. My lawyer would have the divorce papers in a few days. I knew she thought she could abuse me forever. I was glad that I had nothing worth stealing except my house, a modest mutual fund investment, and my eventual pension. I owned the house before I met her. I wanted the satisfaction of serving her before she could serve me. Strangely, I got the feeling she was in no big hurry for a divorce. Being married gave her the freedom to screw around without making any commitments. She was happy with the status quo, at least for now. Even though she would never admit it, she depended on my consistency and stability. She would leave with nothing but regrets. I knew she underestimated my resolve. My plan was in motion. The next step was a visit to the Department of Immigration and Naturalization. I had an appointment with a Ms. Saunders. When I found her cubicle, I was awestruck. She was beautiful. No, more than that, she was stunning. I was expecting an overweight, disgruntled bureaucrat. "Mr. Taylor," she said, smiling at me and extending her hand. "Please, have a seat. I understand you are here to report a case of immigration fraud. Is that right?" she said, smiling. I didn't answer at first. I was lost in her eyes. Her raven black hair and big brown eyes and radiant smile hypnotized me. My body ached from not being with a woman for a long time. If I had to order the perfect woman, it would have been her. I could feel my heart rate increase. She awakened feelings in me that I thought were dead. I struggled to focus. "I hope you don't mind me saying this, but you are much prettier than I expected." "I hope I'm not being too forward," I said, sitting down. She blushed and looked down at her desk modestly. "Thank you, Mr. Taylor. I haven't heard such a nice compliment in a good while. Let's get down to the business at hand, Mr. Taylor. Why are you here?" she said in her most professional voice. I told her the whole story. My soon-to-be ex-wife married me for the purpose of getting a green card. She never loved me and planned on dumping me when her plan was completed. The entire marriage was a sham, a fraud, and I don't want her to get away with it. "Do you have any proof of what you were saying?" I took a tape recorder out of my pocket and several pictures and emails. I played the tape. My face showed the obvious pain it caused. I don't know if I could use it in court, but it should make my point. I also have pictures of her having sex with her boyfriend in the parking lot of a restaurant and other places. They were not very discreet. She looked at the pictures with a poker face. "I think we have enough to proceed, Mr. Taylor. We'll be in touch with you," she said, standing up. "We take a very dim view of immigration fraud, especially since 9/11. Thank you for alerting this office." She sounded very professional. "Now that we have the business out of the way, would you have dinner with me tonight?" I said with pleading eyes. I could sense her ambivalence. I could see her mind appraising the situation and me. "By the way, what is your first name?" "Denise. Denise Saunders. Glad to meet you." "I'm Jack." "Well, what do you say, Denise? It is not good policy to take work out of the office. I promise not to mention anything about my ex. No business tonight. I have not had a woman's company for a long, long time, especially a lady as lovely as you are. Come on, it's just dinner. Even immigration officials have to eat." I promised to be a perfect gentleman. I waited for her response and hoped for the best. After a few moments of looking at my best smile, she said okay with reservations. "Great. What time would you like me to pick you up? If you could meet me in the front of the building at 5:30, we can have an early dinner. I'll call my sitter and tell her I'll be a little late. I can't believe I'm doing this. There is something about you that I trust. I don't know why. You won't be sorry. I promise," I said, trying to control my enthusiasm. I felt like a teenager going on his first date. I had time to go home, get cleaned up, and be back in plenty of time. I realized for the first time in months, I felt good. At dinner, we spoke of many things. She loosened up after a while, and I had the feeling that we had known each other a long time. We were both happy to be in the company of each other. She told about her divorce and her 7-year-old daughter, named Hannah. We talked about her love of cooking and hiking, and I talked of my sons and my love of martial arts and motorcycles. We discovered that we were very different, yet compatible. I found myself wanting to hug her. I kept imaging her body pressed against mine with fiery passion in her eyes. She picked up on my distraction. "What are you thinking? You have such a faraway look in your eyes," she said with affection, looking at me intently. "I was hoping that you were having as much fun as I am. When I look at you, I get a warm feeling. I see passion and strength in your eyes. From the first moment I saw you, I felt a connection. I feel it too. What is happening here? We just met. I don't even know you. Maybe we just better slow down." That sounds like good advice, very logical, but I'm just going with the flow. If I get too carried away, please just tell me. I don't want to offend you or have you think I'm some kind of nut. No, actually I'm flattered. I never thought of myself as being that attractive. For the record, I think that every woman I see from this day onward will come in second to you. I couldn't shake the feeling that we had known each other before. Maybe, in a different lifetime we had been lovers. I can't believe you. Look at my face. Do I look like I'm kidding? She didn't answer. The expression on her face said she understood. How do you feel about what your wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, I interjected. Jack, how do you feel about her betrayal and manipulation? Denise asked, changing the subject. I hesitated for a moment to collect my thoughts. My face betrayed the pain that I thought I was past. I feel sad, hurt, and angry. My ego has taken a serious beating. I never had a chance to make her happy. She wouldn't let me. I was set up from the beginning. I just can't understand her need to disrespect me. Maybe that hurts more than anything. Could be, there is nothing more to understand than what you see. She is what she is. You're a gentle, kind man. I know that in my heart. You don't deserve how she has treated you. Fortunately, Denise didn't see the other side of me. The part that I kept carefully controlled and reserved for when I needed it. What would you like to see happen to her? She married me to get a green card, among other things. I think the only fitting punishment would be to make sure she gets a one-way ticket back to Istanbul and nothing in the divorce. I said, clenching my fists. Denise reached across the table and took my hands in hers. I could feel her energy and her compassion. It calmed me down. We spoke more of what to do about Mira. How did your ex-husband ever let you go? He didn't. I ran. He wanted me to be his punching bag forever. Unfortunately for him, I had other plans. When he struck Hannah, it was the last straw. I couldn't take it anymore. I left him and never looked back. That was 3 years ago. I'm glad he was such a fool. If he wasn't, we wouldn't be here and I would not be sitting here holding your hand. The thought of anyone hurting Denise enraged me. A small band started playing. They were pretty good. Would you like to dance, lady? They're playing our song. Really, what song is that? Whatever they're playing, I said, pulling her to me, beginning to sway to the music. The feeling of her pressed against me and the scent of her perfume had a strong effect on Mr. Happy. I felt her relax and melt into me. Don't worry about Mira. I'll take care of everything tomorrow, she whispered in my ear as we danced. I realized that I saw more than passion and strength in her eyes. I saw her soul and my future. We kissed with gentle passion and held each other tightly when I took Denise home. I wanted her, and I knew she wanted me. We both knew without speaking. The next time we were together we would make love. I tore myself away from her. Trying to sleep that night, I kept seeing her face and hearing her laugh. I thought, could I be in love already? I wasn't sure. All I knew was that life goes on. Self-pity and regrets are a waste of time, and I had wasted enough time. I was happy. When I returned home, Mira was in the kitchen sitting at the table. I'm glad you're here, I said, sitting across from her. Friday is your last day. I will be home by 6 p.m. Please be here. I have something important to say to you before you go. Will you do that for me? Why don't you tell me now? No, I'm tired. I'm going to bed. I will be glad to get my bed back. I've been in that guest room for too long. I should have made you sleep in the guest room. I should have done a lot of things differently. I went into the den to watch some TV. 20 minutes later, Mira was standing in the doorway wearing the black lingerie I had bought her for our second anniversary. She looked as sexy as ever. I was angry with myself when my body responded. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of knowing she still had that power over me. Jack, you can have me if you want to. It's been so long. Tomorrow, I'm walking out of your life forever. Tonight, you can take me any way you want to for old time's sake. I'm yours, she said in her most sultry voice. I know you still care for me. I see it in your face. Could we forget all of our differences and problems for one night, please? She cooed. I stood up and walked towards her, placing my hands gently on her face. She looked hopeful. I wouldn't screw you with the dog's meat, I said, pushing her face away from me. A pained and confused expression crossed her face. I would remember that look forever. Her last attempt to manipulate and use me had failed. I didn't hate her. What I felt was worse. I felt nothing, numb, empty. I just knew that I needed to get away from her. To feel anything but revulsion would be to invite more heartache. I slept restlessly that night. When the sun rose, my plan for retribution would begin. At 9 a.m., I was in my lawyer's office. Okay, Jack. I'll have your divorce documents today by 3 o'clock. What else? I want to sue Max Brown for alienation of affection or intentional infliction of emotional distress, or anything else you can think of. I want him to pay. He didn't actually cause my marriage to fall apart, but I want him to pay anyway. I also want to sue the bank for not enforcing its morals clause in Max Brown's contract. They knew he was screwing my wife and allowed it to happen. I want to serve these papers personally today at 4 p.m. Can we do this? I hope you're not planning on doing something stupid, said my lawyer. This situation might get really ugly. It is legal for you to serve the papers as long as there is a witness. I hope it does get ugly. I really do. It's better if you don't know what I'm planning, I said with a look of steel determination. I arrived at Max Brown's office at 4 o'clock. A clerk showed me where he was. I saw him leaning over a secretary, placing his face too close to hers. She was trying to put some space between him and her. He looked up in time to see me coming. As I walked towards him, I slipped into the relaxed focus that I call combat mode. Max was about to experience some serious pain. He looked worried, then defiant. What are you doing here, Taylor? He was not going to wait long to get his answer. I have some gifts for you, I said, handing him a copy of my divorce papers, naming him as the correspondent in adultery. He looked annoyed. Everyone in the office was watching. I handed him another document. This document is a lawsuit charging you with alienation of affection, causing the breakdown of my marriage. And this is a copy of my lawsuit against your bank for allowing this blatant affair to continue in full view and knowledge of your supervisors in violation of the bank's morals clause of your contract. I gave him some of the explicit pictures I had of him and Mira. Your boss really liked those pictures, I said with a smile. Is that it? He was really angry now. I could see the blood rushing to his head. He could barely contain himself. One more thing, I said, walking away from him and stopping. Your fiancée should be receiving these papers and pictures right about now by messenger service. I guess she is not too happy with you at the moment. I think she might want her car back. Who is getting screwed now, a-hole? When he started to rush towards me yelling, I'll kill you, I knew I had him where I wanted him. I smiled as he ran towards me with clenched fist. My day of retribution was at hand. The next several seconds seemed to move slowly. I waited for his attack and easily sidestepped his charge, sending 2 rapid punches to his liver, followed by a flurry of blows to his torso. Then, I drove my knee into his groin hard enough to lift him off the floor. This was followed by a slap to his ear which ruptured his eardrum. A sweeping backward movement of my leg took his legs away as a simultaneous palm strike broke his nose. He hit the floor with a thud. He wasn't dead, but I had seriously upset his day. Lucky for him, the blow to his nose was intended to break it, not drive the cartilage into his brain. I had considered that option. As the fog of battle lifted, I heard clapping. It seemed to grow louder and louder. The secretary that Max had been harassing was applauding. This was followed by more clapping. I seemed every woman in the office joined in and was happy that Max got his butt kicked. Obviously, no one was shedding any tears for him. I stood there surprised by their support. Call the police and tell them to bring an ambulance, I said to the nearest secretary. I think Max over here has a bad headache. She handed me a slip of paper with her phone number on it. She whispered, call me. The police questioned me at length. They couldn't understand how so much damage could be done to Max in less than 10 seconds. There were 15 witnesses that said I had acted in self-defense after Max attacked me, threatening to kill me. Reluctantly, they told me to go home and that they would have some questions for me later. I felt good on the drive home. One of my tormentors had been dealt with. Now, there was one to go. When I arrived home, I called Denise and asked her to meet me at home when she got off from work. Mira showed up exactly at 6 p.m. She was irate. Jack, what the hell have you done? That scene you pulled in my office was humiliating. Everyone in the office is talking about it. I'll lose my job. You almost killed Max. I never knew you could be so heartless and cruel. Cruel? You're calling me cruel? You screwed that dipshit in my bed and you're calling me cruel? You have one hell of a lot of nerve. He's damned lucky to still be breathing, I said, trying to control myself. Who is this bimbo? She inquired, finally recognizing Denise's presence. This is no bimbo as you put it. Denise is my very good friend, I said, putting my arm around Denise's waist and kissing her on her cheek. Denise works for the Department of Immigration and Naturalization. The look on Myra's face was priceless, and she began to understand something was up. Why is she here? I wanted her here to wish you a safe trip. Trip? I'm not going anywhere. Oh yes you are, I said, opening the front door. 3 men waited outside, 2 G-man types and a short balding fellow. They came inside and immediately the short guy asked, Mira Taylor? Yes. You've been served. These papers are suing you for divorce for adultery. He turned and left. That left to 2 men. Her jaw dropped. She looked at me, then at them. She looked like she had just been sentenced to death. They showed their ID and badges and said, We have credible information that your immigration status in this country was obtained fraudulently. Please come with us. We have a few questions we'd like to ask you." As she was being escorted out, she paused at the doorway and turned back to face me. Her green eyes searched mine, desperate, pleading. "Jack, you promised you'd never let anything happen to me," she said, her voice a mix of defiance and desperation. I stood there for a moment, unmoved, letting the weight of her words hang in the air. Then, without a flicker of emotion, I replied, "I lied." I closed the door firmly behind her, sealing off not just the moment but the entire chapter of my life. Forever. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
From street to success, a 12-year journey. John, a middle-aged carpenter with a kind heart, walks through the bustling city streets, reflecting on a day 12 years ago that changed his life. On a cold, rainy evening, he noticed a 10-year-old girl, Emily, huddled in a doorway, begging for food. Moved by her plight, John offered her a meal and shelter. This simple act of kindness blossomed into a deep bond, providing Emily with the stability and support she needed. Years later, Emily, now a successful software engineer, honors John at a high-profile tech event, revealing how his belief in her transformed her life. Hello, my friends. I hope all you are fine. This is Narrative Stories channel. Let's start this story. John, a middle-aged man with a warm demeanor, navigated through the bustling city streets. The sun had just begun to set, casting a golden hue over the skyscrapers and bathing the city in a soft amber glow. As he walked, John's thoughts drifted back to a day 12 years ago that had changed his life in ways he couldn't have imagined. The sounds of traffic and the chatter of people around him faded as his mind wandered back to that cold, rainy evening. John had always been a man of simple means, working diligently as a carpenter. He had a kind heart and a steady hand, qualities that endeared him to his clients and friends. Yet there was a restlessness within him, a sense that he hadn't quite fulfilled his purpose. This feeling often led him to reflect on his past, especially on that particular night that seemed so distant yet vividly present in his memory. 12 years ago, on a cold and rainy evening, John had been walking home from work, the city's streets almost deserted under the relentless downpour. His coat was soaked through, and his breath came out in visible puffs in the chilly air. As he hurried along, eager to reach the warmth of his modest apartment, he noticed a small figure huddled in the doorway of a closed store. The girl was young, around 10 years old, with matted hair and clothes that clung to her small frame, drenched and dirty. She was holding a cardboard sign with shaky handwriting that read, "Please help. Need money for food." John's heart ached at the sight. He slowed his pace, his eyes meeting hers. They were wide and filled with a mixture of fear and hope, a look that tugged deeply at his conscience. John approached the girl cautiously, not wanting to startle her. "Hey there," he said gently, kneeling to her level. "My name's John. What's yours?" She hesitated, glancing around as if expecting someone to swoop in and take away her chance of getting help. "Emily," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain. John smiled warmly. "Emily, are you hungry?" She nodded, her eyes wide and cautious. "Come with me," he offered, extending his hand. "Let's get you something to eat." They walked together to a nearby diner, John holding an umbrella over Emily as she shivered beside him. Inside, the warmth enveloped them, and John ordered a hearty meal for Emily. She ate ravenously, and as she did, John gently coaxed her story from her. Emily had been living on the streets for several weeks after her mother, a single parent struggling with addiction, had disappeared. Emily had no other family to turn to and had been trying to survive on her own. As Emily finished her meal, John faced a decision. He couldn't bear the thought of sending her back out into the cold night. "Emily," he said softly, "I have a spare room at my place. It's not much, but it's warm and safe. Would you like to stay there for a while?" Tears welled up in Emily's eyes as she nodded. "Yes, please," she whispered, her voice cracking with relief and gratitude. John led her to his modest apartment, a small but cozy space filled with handmade furniture and the smell of fresh wood. He showed her to the spare room, which he quickly prepared with clean sheets and blankets. Emily looked around, her eyes wide with wonder and gratitude. For the first time in weeks, she felt safe. Over the next few days, John and Emily began to form a bond. They shared meals and conversations, and John learned more about Emily's past. She was a bright and curious child, despite the hardships she had faced. She talked about her dreams, her love for books, and her longing for a normal life. John listened, offering comfort and understanding. One evening, as they sat together after dinner, Emily asked, "Why did you help me, John?" He looked at her, his eyes filled with kindness. "Because everyone deserves a chance, Emily. And sometimes, all it takes is one person to believe in you." Emily smiled, feeling a warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. John knew that providing temporary shelter was only the first step. He wanted to give Emily the stability she needed to thrive. He began by enrolling her in a local school. The principal, moved by Emily's story, agreed to help her catch up on her studies. Emily was nervous on her first day, but John reassured her, walking her to the school gates and promising to be there when she finished. Every day after school, John would help Emily with her homework, encouraging her to pursue her interests. He noticed her fascination with technology and decided to nurture it. He introduced her to computers and basic coding, something he had a rudimentary understanding of. Emily's eyes would light up as she learned, her mind soaking up knowledge like a sponge. Despite the new opportunities, Emily faced numerous challenges. She struggled with her past trauma and the emotional scars left by her mother's abandonment. At school, she sometimes felt out of place, her experiences making her feel different from her peers. John was always there to support her, providing a safe space where she could express her feelings and fears. Emily's resilience began to shine through. She tackled her studies with determination, often staying up late to finish her assignments and learn new coding skills. John marveled at her progress, proud of the young woman she was becoming. He made sure to celebrate her achievements, no matter how small, reinforcing her confidence and self-worth. As the years passed, Emily continued to excel in school. She discovered a passion for technology, particularly in coding and software development. John's modest apartment became a hub of learning and creativity, filled with books, computers, and coding projects. Emily's grades soared, and she began to dream of a future in the tech industry. In high school, Emily's talent was recognized by her teachers, who encouraged her to apply for scholarships. John supported her every step of the way, helping her with applications and essays. The turning point came when Emily was awarded a full scholarship to a prestigious university, a testament to her hard work and determination. The day she received the acceptance letter, she ran to John, tears of joy streaming down her face. "We did it, John," she exclaimed, and he hugged her tightly, his heart swelling with pride. Emily's university years were marked by hard work and remarkable achievements. She thrived in her studies, earning top marks and gaining the respect of her professors and peers. She continued to stay in touch with John, frequently visiting him and sharing her successes. John's pride in Emily grew with each passing year, his heart warmed by the knowledge that his act of kindness had set her on a path to success. Upon graduating with honors, Emily was offered a position at a leading tech company. She dove into her work with passion, quickly climbing the ranks and earning recognition for her innovative ideas. Yet, she never forgot the man who had given her a chance when she needed it most. John's influence remained a guiding force in her life, his lessons in kindness and resilience shaping her approach to her career and relationships. 12 years after that fateful night, Emily had not only become a successful software engineer, but also an entrepreneur. She developed a groundbreaking app designed to help children from disadvantaged backgrounds learn coding and technology skills. The app gained widespread recognition, receiving accolades from the tech community and educational institutions alike. Emily decided to launch her app with a special event, inviting influential figures from the tech industry, educators, and the media. She also made sure to invite John, though she kept the details of her connection to him a secret. She wanted to surprise him and show him the impact his kindness had made. On the day of the launch, John received an invitation to a high-profile tech event. Puzzled but curious, he decided to attend. As he walked into the grand hall, he felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. The room was filled with people, and a large stage was set up at the front. John found a seat, wondering what had prompted the invitation. As the event began, Emily took the stage, her presence commanding attention. She began her presentation, explaining the inspiration behind her app and its potential to change lives. John watched in awe, recognizing the young woman before him, but not yet grasping the full connection. Toward the end of her speech, Emily's tone grew more personal. "I want to share a story," she began, her voice steady and filled with emotion. 12 years ago, I was a lost and frightened child, begging on the streets. A kind man saw me, offered me food, and gave me shelter. He believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. John's heart pounded as he listened, the realization dawning on him. Emily continued, her eyes scanning the audience until they found John. "That man's name is John, and he's here with us today. John, could you please join me on stage?" The room erupted in applause as John stood, his emotions a whirlwind of pride, gratitude, and love. He walked to the stage, tears mingling with his. 3. Full circle. Emily continued, her voice breaking with emotion. "John, you gave me a chance when I had nothing. You showed me kindness and love, and you believed in me. Everything I've achieved is because of you. Thank you for changing my life." She presented John with a token of gratitude, a beautifully crafted wooden plaque with the words, "To John, my guardian and friend, thank you for believing in me." The audience stood in admiration, applauding the profound bond between them. The story ended with John and Emily embracing, surrounded by applause and admiration from the audience. Their journey had come full circle, a testament to the transformative power of kindness, a band, and the enduring impact of believing in someone. The warmth of their connection filled the room, inspiring everyone present to believe in the power of giving and the incredible journeys it could set in motion. Thank you for being a part of Narrative Stories. Your support and engagement mean the world to us. We are committed to bringing you the best in storytelling. What kinds of stories would you like to see next? Share your thoughts in the comments below.
The alarm sounded at its usual time, 6 a.m., and my wife, Anita, and I rose to begin our day. As I sat up on the edge of the bed and swung my feet to the floor, an audible groan escaped me. "What's the matter? You sound like an old man," she teased on her way to the bathroom. Feeling like an old man after the events of the previous night, I heard her laughter echoing from the bathroom as I reminisced about our passionate lovemaking. The evening had concluded with a particularly sensual act. Today marked the beginning of her week-long business trip, leaving me alone at home, a prospect I wasn't eagerly anticipating. The sound of the shower running tempted me to join her, but the memories of the previous night's exertions convinced me otherwise. When she returned to the bedroom, her mood was upbeat, contrasting with my self-pitying state. She encouraged me to rise and start the day, saying, "Come on, old man, get up and get going. We need 2 breadwinners to pay the mortgage on this place." With a nod, I replied, "All right, I'm moving," and stumbled into the bathroom to begin my morning routine. Later, we gathered downstairs for breakfast before she departed for the airport, and I made my way to work. Anita, an attorney, and I both worked at a medium-sized manufacturing plant in St. Louis. She specialized in negotiations and traveled with teams off-plant. This trip involved negotiating a new subcontract with a major aerospace firm in Denver. She traveled several times a year for similar negotiations, typically gone at least a week each time. At 35, she had graduated cum laude from the State University 12 years ago, standing at 5 feet 4 inches, weighing 125 pounds, with measurements of 34-24-35. I'm Jack Fillmore, 37, working as an engineer in the same company as my wife. Standing at 6 feet 1 inch and weighing 165 pounds, I work out to stay in shape. We both enjoyed playing golf and often formed a foursome with friends. We met at a company picnic, and it was love at first sight for me. It seemed the same for her, as after a whirlwind courtship, we got married 6 months later. We've been married for 7 years now, and just bought the house we're living in. 3 months ago, it was the home where we planned to start our family, and Anita was going off her birth control pills upon her return from this trip. We were thrilled about having a family, and she intended to be a stay-at-home mom until the kids started school. Our parents, living in the area, were also anticipating our family expansion. After breakfast, I loaded Anita's travel bag into her car and gave her a goodbye kiss. Tears welled up in her eyes as she got into her car to leave. I expressed my hope that soon I wouldn't be traveling, so we wouldn't have to go through these goodbyes. She shared her dislike for goodbyes, and I reassured her that I felt the same way. I mentioned that I would see her on Friday evening, and we could have takeout so she could rest. She agreed, saying, "Sounds good, bye." I observed as she backed out of the garage and into the street. Waving as she left, I trudged into the house to complete my preparations for leaving for the office. Arriving at the workplace, I ascended to the engineering department, grabbed a cup of coffee from the break room, and headed to my desk. Barely settling in, my phone rang. I identified myself to the caller as Fillmore. My boss, Evan, asked me to come into his office. I agreed, picked up my coffee, and made my way to his office. Evan mentioned that he recalled me mentioning last Friday that Anita would be traveling this week. He then presented an opportunity. Gil Hawkins, our field service engineer in California, was sick and unable to handle a problem a customer in San Jose was having with one of our models. Given my experience with that model, Evan asked if I would like to head out to San Jose and check it out. I agreed, stating that there wasn't much happening at the office, and I was batching it this week. Evan instructed me to get Kathy to arrange my reservations and tickets, and to call the customer to let them know I was coming and find out the problem. Feeling more enthusiastic about life, I stopped by Evan's secretary Kathy's desk and informed her about my flight and reservation needs. Later, I called the customer from my desk to understand their problem before heading home to pack. On the way home, a plan formed in my mind. If I finished quickly, I could surprise my wife with a stop in Denver on my way home. The thought of spending a couple of days with her in Denver was becoming increasingly exciting. While waiting for my flight at the airport, I attempted to call Anita's cell phone, but she didn't answer. So I left a voicemail indicating I'd be staying at my folks for a couple of days and to reach me on my cell during the evenings. Everything worked out fine. I was at the customer's location Tuesday morning, made the necessary equipment adjustments, and had it checked out and running satisfactorily by the afternoon. Returning to my hotel, I called the airline and secured a flight that would get me to Denver at 9 p.m. Mountain Time. Checking out of the hotel in San Jose, I headed to the airport in San Francisco, where I had dinner. While eating, Anita called me on my cell, and we chatted for a few minutes. She inquired about my folks, and I responded as though I were at their house. She mentioned that negotiations were progressing, but she was tired and planned a quiet evening in her hotel room. We bid our goodbyes with expressions of love, and after eating, I boarded my 9:45 p.m. flight. I checked in at the desk at Anita's suite hotel, and after verifying my identity, they provided me with a card for entry to her suite. Entering her suite quietly, I noticed a lamp illuminating the computer table, and her laptop was on it, closed. However, there was no sign of Anita. I placed my suitcase down and checked the bedroom and bathroom, finding them empty. I thought to myself that she probably hadn't returned to her room yet. I decided to sit down and wait, or perhaps go down and check the lounge to see if she was there. I then observed that the door to the adjacent room was slightly open. Approaching it, the door swung open silently on well-lubricated hinges. Surveying the living room and the adjoining suite, I found no one. Perplexed, I entered the room and suddenly heard a groan emanating from the bedroom. My gut tightened, and I broke into a sweat as I quietly approached the bedroom door. Although my heart may not have ceased, my breath certainly did. Witnessing the scene in the dimly lit room, Anita was unclothed, facing me, engaged with a man whose face remained unseen. My initial urge was to burst in, confront her, and confront the man, but reason prevailed over my emotions. Slowly backing away from the door, I returned to her suite. Retrieving the digital camera from my travel bag, brought along for souvenir pictures, I returned to the other bedroom door. Turning off the flash and adjusting the camera for dim light photos, I calmly captured several images of the bed scene without their awareness. They were so engrossed in their activities that their eyes remained closed, oblivious to their surroundings. Before heading back to her suite, I examined an open briefcase on the table, finding a business card with the name Sam Harris, the chief negotiator for our company. I pocketed the card. Back in her suite, I utilized a camera-computer interface cable I had with me to connect the camera to her laptop. Since our laptops had the same photo program, I easily downloaded a picture from my camera and set it as her desktop background. I then packed my camera into my travel bag and left her suite quietly. Before departing, I heard her cry out in climax. I nearly broke down right there, but pressed on towards the elevator. After returning the entry card to the desk, I contacted the airline to inquire about the next flight back to St. Louis. Luckily, a 6:30 a.m. flight was available, promising a 9:30 a.m. arrival home. With some luck, I calculated this would coincide with the time Anita would be opening her laptop at the negotiating table. She would then realize she had been caught, signaling the end of our marriage. Returning to the airport, I checked into a nearby motel where sleep eluded me. I kept replaying the distressing scene from her hotel bedroom. I wept, allowing my pain to manifest in tears. By the time I left the motel at 5 a.m., I had exhausted my tears, resolved to conclude our marriage swiftly. Upon arriving in St. Louis, my cell phone began to ring. As I entered my car and checked the caller, I saw it was Anita. I turned it off and headed home. Upon entering the house, the phone was ringing, but checking the caller ID revealed it was Anita again. Letting it go to the answering machine, I heard her sobbing on the phone. She pleaded with me to call her right away, expressing that she needed to talk with me and it was important. I ignored her tearful plea, changed my clothes, rented a U-Haul, and returned home to start packing. If my calculations were correct, she would arrive around 4 p.m., and I aimed to be out of the house by then. It took a couple of hours, but I successfully moved all my personal belongings to a rental storage unit. Before packing, I contacted our lawyer and scheduled an appointment for that afternoon. After unloading my belongings at the storage unit, I met with our lawyer and requested the initiation of divorce proceedings. While tempted to cite infidelity as the cause, I opted for incompatibility, reserving the infidelity accusation in case she contested the divorce. I also requested him to draft a new will designating my brother as a beneficiary. Making a stop at the bank, I moved half of our savings and checking balance to new accounts solely in my name. Subsequently, I contacted my investment advisor to perform a similar transfer for our accounts with him. With a heavy heart, I drove to my parents' house, carrying my suitcase with me. I entered through the open door, and my mother, spotting me first, exclaimed loudly, "Jack, where have you been? Anita has been calling here several times looking for you. Did you inform her that you were staying here?" My retired father joined us, and I sat down to explain everything to them. They were astonished when I revealed Anita's infidelity and the end of our marriage. I inquired if I could stay with them for a few days until I found a furnished apartment, and they agreed. My calculations seemed fairly accurate because around 6 p.m., as we were sitting down to eat, the doorbell rang. My dad answered it, and a moment later, he returned with Anita, looking visibly distressed. She questioned why I hadn't answered her calls, expressing the need to talk. She noted that I had moved all my stuff out of the house and assumed the message left on my desktop would provide the necessary information. I responded, expressing my fear that it was her, and suggesting that we go somewhere to talk. I firmly stated that I was no longer her sweetheart and had nothing to discuss. Divorce proceedings had already begun, and anything that needed to be conveyed could go through our lawyers. I explained that what I witnessed in Denver had destroyed any feelings I had for her and requested her to leave so I could finish my dinner. She pleaded, and I reiterated that there was nothing to talk about without addressing the infidelity. I mentioned having pictures and that I planned to confront her lover, Sam, the following day. She tearfully insisted on talking. I responded, suggesting that she leave, as my dinner was getting cold. I proposed that she write me a letter, articulating how she could rationalize breaking her wedding vows. I assumed that, as a smart lawyer, she could explain how it was all my fault, and that she could still love and respect me very much. With a sob, she turned away. Before reaching the door, she turned back and pleaded again. I said goodbye, and after she left, still crying, my parents remained stunned. My mom commented on the harshness of my response. I retorted, sharing the harsh reality of her actions and my inability to trust her again. I questioned whether she wanted me to give her grandchildren from a woman like that. My dad suggested that with time, my perspective might change. I replied, expressing doubt, and suggesting we talk about something else so I could digest my food.
That Monday morning when I left home, I was feeling sorry for myself having to leave Jack. But I thought how wonderful it would be when I got back, and we could start our family. We'd waited this long to make sure we were set financially and career-wise to begin being parents. Now everything was almost in place. The journey to Denver was uneventful. I sat next to Sam Harris, our chief negotiator, and we briefly discussed the upcoming negotiations and our families. Sam, who had been married for 20 years with 2 high school-aged children, knew that I planned to quit work upon pregnancy, and he expressed that he would miss me. Sam and I, a negotiating team since before my marriage, had a comfortable rapport. The other 2 team members conversed behind us. Upon reaching the Denver hotel, we checked into our rooms, with Sam and I opting for adjoining rooms as usual. Originally intended for late-night strategy sessions, this arrangement evolved about 10 years ago when our relationship took a physical turn. We convinced ourselves that it was a stress relief mechanism after challenging negotiations, and at the time, we considered it not cheating on his wife if it contributed to our professional collaboration. After Jack and I got married, I refrained for a couple of years due to guilt. However, during an especially demanding negotiation, Sam proposed resuming our arrangement to relieve stress, and I reluctantly agreed. It became a habit again, with the thrill of secrecy boosting my libido at home, benefiting Jack and lessening my guilt. On the first night of this trip, we didn't meet as I felt tired after dinner. However, after the initial day of negotiations, I agreed to meet him the following night. The next morning, upon opening my laptop, I was shocked by what I saw on the screen. Sam, sitting next to me, quickly closed the lid, and we took the laptop to the hallway. He was furious, demanding to know what kind of content I had on my desktop. I responded that I didn't know and explained that it wasn't there the last time I used it. Still in shock, I suggested checking it again. Upon reopening it, we both looked at the picture, and Sam exclaimed that it was me. I questioned how it could be me, but he insisted, adding that it was probably him under me, although my face couldn't be seen. I asked if he had left the laptop unattended at any point the previous day. He denied it, saying that it was with him during the trip and in his suite while he was in mine. I wondered if anyone could have accessed my room with a camera, but he didn't think so, stating that the door was closed and he assumed it was locked. I advised him to get back to the hotel and check if anyone had been given access to his room the previous night. I assured him that I would handle things on my end and asked him to reach Jack to find out where he was last night. He expressed doubt, saying it couldn't have been Jack as he spoke with him at his folks' place. I asked if he had called Jack on his parents' phone, to which he replied that Jack had asked him to call on his cell phone. Worried about the situation, I mentioned that I didn't like the sound of it, as Jack could have been anywhere during their conversation. I instructed him to call me on my cell if he found out anything, and urged him to do whatever he could to manage the fallout from this. I told him to take a cab back to the hotel and said goodbye. Feeling anxious, I considered the possibility that Jack had taken the picture and placed it on my laptop. It seemed like a message that our marriage was over. I needed to return to the hotel to gather information. The receptionist arranged a cab, and 15 minutes later I was back, checking the front desk to see if anyone accessed my suite. The clerk confirmed that a Mr. Jack Fillmore received a card at 9:45 the previous evening, returned half an hour later. At that moment, I knew my marriage was likely over. The man I loved more than anything had disappeared. Despite the heartbreak, I felt compelled to fight for him. Entering my suite, I immediately tried to reach him on his cell and at work. No answer on his cell, it had been turned off. Leaving an important voice message, he called me back soon. His work secretary informed me he was on a business trip to California, expected back tomorrow. That was it. He had gone to California and stopped on his way back to surprise me, I guess we were both surprised. Calling his folks, they hadn't seen him for several days. I asked them to have him call me. No answer at home, but I left a message there too. Alone in the suite, I cried, realizing I had no way to talk to him unless I went home. So I picked up the phone, made reservations for the next flight to St. Louis, and after packing, I informed Sam of the situation. He was quiet before speaking. Sam mentioned that it seemed we were both facing divorce or worse. He pointed out the company's policy against managerial employees fraternizing, highlighting the potential risk of both of us being fired, which would not look good on our records. He expressed concern about losing Jack and acknowledged that losing his family would be bad too. He advised me to get back to St. Louis and find Jack, urging me to see if he would listen to reason. He informed me that he had made reservations for a flight leaving at noon, scheduled to be back by 4:30. For his sake, he emphasized the importance of finding Jack and talking to him. Sam mentioned that he would let me know how it goes, and explained that he had to stay there until negotiations were finished. He assured me that he would be waiting to hear from me. We said our goodbyes. Picking up my bag and laptop, I hurried down to the lobby, checked out, and took the hotel limo to the airport. Praying all the way back to St. Louis, I hoped to get Jack to talk to me. I had to explain it was just closeness and did not affect him at all. I had to stake everything on the hope that he could be unemotional about my infidelity and accept it for what it was. Nothing but meaningless closeness. Arriving back home, nothing seemed out of place at first. However, entering our bedroom and finding all his belongings gone made me realize he knew and had left me. I had to find him. After many fruitless phone calls, I decided to go to his folks' house to see if he was there or if they had an idea where he was. He was at his folks', and the reception I received from him made me nauseous in its unfeeling brutality. He informed me he was in the process of filing for divorce, had no desire to talk, and nothing I could say would change his mind. After sarcastically suggesting I write a long letter explaining my position, I left and sat in my car, crying. The family we had planned would never happen. Growing old together and enjoying grandchildren together felt like an unattainable dream. From a selfish viewpoint, what grieved me even more was the thought that by the time I found another husband, I might be too old to conceive.
Eventually, I started the car and returned to our vacant house. Following a restless night haunted by visions of Anita and Sam together, I rose early and descended to my folks' home, brewing coffee. Retrieving my laptop and camera, I proceeded to download the camera pictures into the computer, aiming to identify Sam. Examining the pictures, Sam's face remained unclear. However, I noticed something on his right arm reaching towards Anita's chest. Upon closer inspection, I identified a tattoo, a heart with the word Marie on it. Sam's wife was Marie. That's all I needed. I returned upstairs, showered, and prepared for work. When I came back down, my mother was up, preparing breakfast. Later at work, I burned a couple of CDs with the pictures I had taken and a blow-up of Sam's tattoo. I printed several sets and organized them in a folder before walking to our human resources department. I requested to see the manager, Phil, whom I knew from golf outings. Placing a set of pictures in front of him, I explained that the images might appear inappropriate, but they depicted my wife and Sam Harris. The date and time on them confirmed they were taken Tuesday evening in Sam's hotel suite in Denver during a company negotiation trip. Phil seemed visibly shocked and inquired about what he could do. I responded, suggesting that he could terminate both of them for cause under the anti-fraternization clause in their contract with the company. I pointed out that this clause had never been enforced before and questioned whether he was sure about pursuing this course of action. I mentioned that it would bring the affair out in the open and assumed that he was considering divorcing Anita over the matter. I informed him that I already had my lawyer drawing up the papers, but if he chose not to pursue it, I would bring suit against the company. Phil agreed, stating that he would take the matter to the legal department and get the ball rolling. He then prompted me to continue with the next point of discussion. I went in to see my boss, Evan, to inform him about the situation. He was appropriately horrified at what I had to tell him about my wife and Sam Harris, when I requested the rest of the week off as vacation time, and he readily agreed. In parting, he congratulated me on a job well done. During my trip to California, the customer praised the quick resolution of their problem and requested if I would consider taking over the California territory, given the current field engineer's retirement due to ill health. I mentioned that I'd consider it and provide an answer upon my return to work the following week. On my way out of Evan's office, Kathy, his secretary, informed me that my wife had been looking for me and would return later. I instructed Kathy not to let my wife see me under any circumstances and expressed that there was a significant problem as we were getting divorced and she and Sam Harris were involved. I anticipated the news spreading throughout the plant by noon, considering Kathy's inclination for gossip. Returning to my desk, I called Marie Harris, Sam's wife, whom I knew from company picnics. I was aware that my revelations about our spouses could be challenging for her. I contacted Marie and explained the situation, expressing the need to talk as soon as possible. She agreed to meet and provided her address, and I agreed to visit her in 15 minutes. Upon arriving at the Harrises, I felt a sense of dread about disclosing the situation to Marie and her family. However, I believed Sam should face consequences and Anita should not bear the entire fallout. Marie greeted me, offering coffee, which I accepted. I decided to get straight to the point. I disclosed the affair between Sam and Anita, my pursuit of a divorce from Anita, and my decision to have them both fired from their jobs. I mentioned that the information would soon become public knowledge and offered to show her photos as evidence. Observing her face, I was surprised at the lack of a significant reaction. Marie shared that she had suspected Sam's infidelity during company trips for years, but hoped it wasn't true. She acknowledged Sam's previous role as a loving husband and father. Marie expressed regret for both my marriage and her own situation. She considered the possibility of Sam being fired and the challenges he might face finding another well-paying job. She concluded by offering me a set of photographs if I wanted them. Marie expressed gratitude for sharing the photographs, stating that she would leave them for her to look at later when she could gather the strength. I apologized, explaining that I couldn't let the situation go, especially considering Anita and I were on the verge of starting a family. I emphasized the importance of trust and respect in a relationship, qualities I believe the mother of our children should possess. She acknowledged my decision and thanked me for informing her directly, expressing understanding about not wanting to hear it from other sources first. Marie extended her sympathy for my situation with Anita, anticipating her devastation and remorse when she found out about the affair. She wished it were a one-time incident, finding it easier to forgive, but believed it had been ongoing for years, making it harder to accept now that it was out in the open. Marie emphasized her pride and the need to hold her head up. I assured her that if there was anything I needed, I would let her know before leaving and heading back to my parents' house. Update. It's been 6 months since I initiated divorce proceedings. I received my copy of the agreement dissolving my marriage to Anita this morning. I never talked with her or saw her again after the time she came to my parents' house. My lawyer handled it all. I gave her the heavily mortgaged house with the highly financed furniture and furnishings to release all claims on me. I also had my name taken off the mortgage. She assumed full responsibility for making the payments. Of course, without a job, she had to put it up for sale and lost her shirt on the deal. She attempted to contest the divorce, but I threatened to change the reason for divorce to infidelity and release the pictures of her and Sam to the internet if she didn't sign the papers in 48 hours. She signed them within the required time, and that is why I'm a free man today. I guess she decided that she didn't want me that bad. Anyway, she was terminated from her job, but she's a smart lawyer and negotiator, so she found another one within a month, not making as much or with the benefits. Seniority brought her in her old job, but I hear she's getting by and dating again. Lots of luck to the boyfriend if she lands him. I wonder if she's told him about our divorce and the reason. Maybe I should enlighten him. Marie divorced Sam and took him to the cleaners financially. He found another job too, after he was terminated, but he's struggling to make the alimony and child support payments with his new salary. I'm now living in Santa Maria, California, a quiet place near the coast, about halfway between the Bay Area and LA. This positions me pretty well to cover both southern and northern parts of the state. I moved here about 4 months back and have an apartment in a complex with other singles and young couples, most trying to save money for a down payment on a house. Housing costs are high out here, and it takes big bucks to buy into the market. I have a steady girlfriend who lives in the same complex. She's divorced, like me, but we're comfortable together, and I think we'll see how it goes in the future with me traveling so much. I really need to trust the one I marry, but I need to make a move before too long if we want to start a family. Biological clocks keep on ticking.
Welcome back, and thank you for tuning into Cheating Tales Lab. We appreciate every single one of you. We'd love to know, what part of the world are you watching from right now? Let us know in the comments. Now, let's dive into today's story. Marshall Huffman's polished Oxford shoes clicked against the marble floors of Pinnacle Acquisition's executive floor. At 48, he cut an imposing figure, 6'2", broad-shouldered, with steel gray eyes that could dissect a balance sheet as easily as they could read a room. His tailored charcoal suit spoke of success, but it was his presence that commanded respect. "Morning, Mr. Huffman," his assistant Sarah called out as he passed her desk. "The Q3 merger projections are on your desk, and Mr. Lancaster wants to see you at 11. Marshall nodded, his mind already processing the day ahead. "Thanks, Sarah. Push the Transglobal meeting to 2. I want to review those projections first." Inside his corner office, Marshall settled into his leather chair, taking in the Manhattan skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. 23 years at Pinnacle had earned him this view, along with the CFO position that made him Robert Lancaster's right hand. The thought of his CEO brought a slight frown to his otherwise composed features. His phone buzzed with a text from his wife, Isabella. "Charity committee meeting with Robert today. Don't wait up for dinner." Marshall's thumb hovered over the message. These meetings had become more frequent lately. He dismissed the thought. Isabella had been managing their social calendar for 15 years, and her networking had only helped their family's position. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Alexandra, his eldest daughter, strode in with the confidence of someone who already saw herself in his chair. At 22, fresh from Harvard Business School, she carried herself with the polished grace of old money, money Marshall had worked decades to provide. "Dad," she said, perching on the edge of his desk rather than taking a seat. "Robert mentioned there might be an opening in strategic planning. I thought I'd stop by and remind you that my Harvard network could be valuable there." Marshall studied his daughter's face. She had Isabella's features, the same honey blonde hair and green eyes. But lately, he'd noticed something else in her expression. Something calculated. "Alexandra, we've discussed this. Entry-level position. Please," she cut him off with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "We both know I'm not entry-level material. Robert agrees with me." The casual use of his CEO's first name didn't escape Marshall's notice. He maintained his neutral expression, years of high-stakes negotiations serving him well. "We'll discuss this at home," he said firmly. "I have the Transglobal merger to focus on." Alexandra's smile tightened. "Of course, Dad. Mother's hosting dinner next week with the Lancaster family. Maybe we can discuss it then." After she left, Marshall pulled up the Transglobal merger documents. The deal would be his largest yet, a $4.2 billion acquisition that would cement Pinnacle's position in the market. His phone buzzed again with a group text from his twins, Thomas and Timothy. "Dad, need to discuss summer internship. Robert mentioned positions opening up." Marshall's jaw tightened. When had his CEO become so involved with his children's careers? The twins were only 19, sophomores at Yale, yet they spoke of Robert with a familiarity that seemed presumptuous for their age. A video call notification popped up on his screen, Victoria, his 17-year-old daughter, from her boarding school. "Dad." Her face filled the screen, the prestigious Westfield Academy's limestone buildings visible behind her. "The school's endowment committee is reviewing donations. Mr. Lancaster said you'd handle it?" "Victoria, why are you talking to Robert about school donations?" She rolled her eyes in a way that reminded him too much of Isabella. "Mom said to ask him first. You're always so busy with work stuff." I am busy, Marshall replied, ensuring your tuition is paid and your trust fund grows. Speaking of which, how's your brother? Andrew's fine. He's probably in lacrosse practice. Oh, Mother said to remind you about next Thursday's dinner. After ending the call, Marshall leaned back in his chair, his mind working with the precision that had made him one of Wall Street's most respected CFOs. Something felt off, like when the numbers in a merger proposal didn't quite add up. The rest of his day passed in a blur of meetings and conference calls. The transglobal merger consumed most of his attention. The deal had to be perfect. By evening, most of Pinnacle's employees had left, leaving the office floors in silence. Sarah stopped by his office one last time. Mr. Huffman, will you be needing anything else?
Mr. Lancaster and Mrs. Huffman left about an hour ago. Another charity meeting, I believe.
Marshall noted the slight hesitation in Sarah's voice. No, thank you, Sarah. Have a good evening. He worked for another hour, reviewing performance reports and bonus structures. His own bonuses had been exceptionally generous over the years, Robert's way of recognizing his contribution to Pinnacle's growth. Those bonuses had funded their mansion in Greenwich, the children's education, Isabella's social endeavors. At 9:30, Marshall decided to head home early. The house would likely be empty. Isabella's charity meetings often ran late, but he had financial models to review in his home office. The drive to Greenwich was quiet, his Mercedes cutting through the cool autumn night. Their estate's gates opened automatically, security cameras tracking his car's progress up the winding driveway. The house stood impressively against the dark sky. 6 bedrooms, 8 bathrooms, a testament to his success. He was about to enter through the front door when he noticed lights in the family room. Voices drifted through the partially open French doors. Isabella's laugh, the one she reserved for social occasions, made him pause. Your real father is Robert Lancaster. Isabella's voice carried clearly through the gap. Marshall's hand froze on the door handle. Inside, he could see his family gathered in the warm light of their family room. Isabella stood by the fireplace, looking elegant in an expensive dress he didn't recognize. Their children sat around her, expressions ranging from amusement to conspiracy. He's been funding everything through your dad's bonuses, Isabella continued, swirling wine in a crystal glass. Once the transglobal merger closes next month, we'll take control of everything. Marshall's too focused on spreadsheets to notice he's just been our front man. The words hit Marshall like physical blows, but decades of corporate negotiations had taught him to control his reactions. He remained perfectly still, gathering intelligence like he would in a hostile takeover. Alexandra's laugh cut through the room. Dad's such a fool. He actually thinks he earned those bonuses. Robert showed me the real books. Every penny was planned. Your father, Isabella emphasized the word with mock sweetness, has been useful. His financial expertise made everything look legitimate. The board trusts him completely. But why keep him around so long? Thomas or Timothy asked. Marshall couldn't see which twin had spoken. Because, darling, Isabella's voice dripped with condescension. Marshall's reputation is impeccable. No one questions his financial decisions. Robert needed that credibility. And the merger? Victoria's voice now, eager to be part of the adult conversation. Will be our masterpiece. Robert Lancaster's voice emerged from a corner of the room Marshall couldn't see. Once it closes, the transfer of assets will be untraceable. Marshall's signature on everything makes it perfectly legal. What about the other shareholders? Andrew asked, surprising Marshall with his grasp of corporate matters. Robert's laugh was cold. They'll be too busy dealing with the merger's fallout to notice where the money went. By the time anyone realizes what happened, we'll be settled somewhere without extradition treaties. And Marshall? Isabella asked, an edge to her voice that Marshall had never heard before. We'll take the fall, Robert replied casually. His signatures are on everything. The board will assume he orchestrated the whole thing. Quite poetic, really. The trusted CFO betraying everyone. Alexandra's Harvard connections will help smooth the transition, Isabella added proudly. No one will question her taking over his position afterward. We've planned everything perfectly. Marshall watched his oldest daughter beam at the praise. The Harvard Alumni Association already thinks I'm following in Dad's footsteps. They have no idea whose footsteps I'm really following. The twins high-fived each other. Yale's business school won't know what hit them, one of them said. Robert's donations guaranteed our spots. When do we tell him? Victoria asked, sounding younger than her 17 years. Tell him? Isabella laughed. Oh, darling, Marshall won't need to be told anything. Once the merger closes, everything will happen so fast he won't know what hit him. Robert has arranged for certain irregularities to be discovered. Marshall's reputation will be destroyed so thoroughly, no one will believe a word he says. The timing has to be perfect, Robert added. The transglobal merger is complex enough that any financial discrepancies will be buried in the details. Marshall's own thoroughness works against him. He's documented everything so meticulously that his signature on the fraudulent documents will be unquestionable. Marshall had heard enough. With the same silent precision he used in corporate takeovers, he withdrew from the door. His mind was already cataloging information, forming strategies, identifying weaknesses in their plan. He made his way to his home office, careful not to make a sound. The room was his sanctuary, a place where he had structured countless deals, orchestrated mergers that had made Pinnacle a powerhouse. Now it would serve a different purpose. Logging into his secure terminal, Marshall began pulling up records. Years of transaction histories, bonus payments, offshore transfers, everything he had overseen as CFO. But now he looked at them with new eyes, seeing the pattern he had missed. Each major merger had corresponded with substantial bonuses to his accounts. Those bonuses had then been quietly transferred to shell companies, companies he now recognized as being controlled by Isabella. Robert had used Marshall's legitimate merger work as cover for massive fraud, while secretly transferring company assets through Marshall's bonuses into accounts his wife controlled. The scheme was brilliant in its simplicity. Marshall's reputation for financial integrity had made him the perfect unwitting accomplice. Every successful deal he closed for Pinnacle had been used to hide their fraudulent transfers. His own legitimate earnings had masked the illegal flow of funds. More disturbing were the documents he found regarding Alexandra. His daughter's Harvard admission, her internships, her entire career path, all had been orchestrated by Robert and Isabella. They had been grooming her to take over Marshall's position after the merger, using her Harvard connections to legitimize the transition. The transglobal merger would be their masterstroke. Marshall could see it clearly now. The complex transaction would provide cover for the largest asset transfer yet. By the time anyone unraveled the details, Robert and Isabella would be gone, along with billions in company assets. Marshall would be left to face federal investigators, his signature on countless fraudulent documents. Hours passed as Marshall dug deeper, documenting everything. His financial expertise, the very skill Robert and Isabella had exploited, now served to uncover their decade-long conspiracy. Every transaction, every transfer, every false document, Marshall captured it all. Dawn was breaking when he finally leaned back in his chair. In the growing light, he could hear movement in the house, his family starting their day, unaware that their carefully constructed plan was about to implode. Marshall allowed himself a small, cold smile. They had underestimated him badly. They saw what they wanted to see. The predictable CFO, too focused on spreadsheets to notice their betrayal. They forgot that those same spreadsheets had helped him orchestrate some of the most complex corporate takeovers in recent history. A knock at his office door. "Dad," Alexandra's voice. "You're home early. Mother said you had a late meeting." "Just reviewing some merger documents," Marshall replied evenly. "How's the Harvard Alumni Association these days?" "Oh, networking, making connections." "Robert think." "I'm sure he does," Marshall cut her off smoothly. "Tell your mother I'll be working from home today. The transglobal merger needs my full attention." After Alexandra left, Marshall began composing emails. The board would need to be informed. Evidence would need to be distributed. Assets would need to be secured. But first, he had some calls to make to certain foreign banks. Let Robert and Isabella think they had orchestrated the perfect plan. Marshall hadn't become Pinnacle's CFO by being predictable. By the time they realized their mistake, it would be far too late. The morning sun cast long shadows across his desk as Marshall began implementing his counterattack. In the house beyond his office, his family went about their morning routines, confident in their secrets. Marshall allowed himself another small smile. They had taught him an invaluable lesson about family loyalty. He intended to show them exactly how well he had learned it. Marshall's fingers moved across his keyboard with surgical precision. Dawn's first light crept through his home office windows, but he hadn't slept. Sleep was a luxury he couldn't afford, not when every minute counted. His computer screens displayed a complex web of financial transactions. 10 years of performance bonuses stretched across multiple spreadsheets, each one a perfectly orchestrated lie. Robert Lancaster's signature appeared consistently alongside his own, a detail that brought a cold smile to Marshall's face. Amateur, he muttered, documenting another fraudulent transfer. Robert had been clever, but he'd made a crucial mistake. He'd assumed Marshall's financial expertise was limited to legitimate transactions. Sarah, his assistant, answered on the first ring despite the early hour. "Mr. Huffman?" "Sarah, I need complete access to all merger documents from the past decade. Every signature, every amendment, every appendix." "And Sarah?" "Use the secure server. No one else needs to know." "Of course, Mr. Huffman. Should I inform Mr. Lancaster?" "No need. He'll find out soon enough." Marshall disconnected the call and pulled up the trans-global merger documents. The deal's complexity had been deliberate. Robert and Isabella had planned to use it as cover for their final heist. But complexity cut both ways. A notification popped up, access granted to the secure server. Marshall's hands flew across the keyboard, his mind dissecting years of financial manipulation. Robert's pattern emerged clearly now: artificially inflated company valuations, funds funneled through Marshall's bonuses, assets quietly transferred to shell companies owned by Isabella. "Sloppy," Marshall commented, noting how Robert had used the same offshore banks repeatedly. "Predictable." He accessed Pinnacle's main financial system using his CFO credentials. Robert had never understood the full extent of Marshall's system access, another fatal mistake. Within hours, Marshall had traced every fraudulent transaction, documented every illegal transfer, mapped every shell company connection. His phone buzzed. "Isabella, darling, are you coming to breakfast? The children are asking for you." Marshall's voice remained perfectly pleasant. "Still working on the trans-global merger." "Don't wait for me," Robert called. "He wants to discuss some last-minute details." "I'm sure he does." After hanging up, Marshall accessed a secure line to contact James Chen, his personal attorney, one whose existence neither Robert nor Isabella knew about. "James, initiate Protocol 7. "Yes, all of it." "And James? Make it ironclad." The next hours passed in a blur of precise financial maneuvers. Marshall methodically transferred all legitimate company assets into secure holding companies, his actions masked by the merger's normal activities. Robert's planned poison pills were identified and neutralized one by one. A knock at his office door. "Dad," Alexandra's voice. "Mother says you've been in here all night." "The merger requires attention, Alexandra. Or perhaps Robert hasn't explained that part to you." A pause. "I don't know what you mean." "Of course not. Tell your mother I'll be busy all day. The trans-global deal needs my personal touch." After Alexandra's footsteps faded, Marshall accessed another secure line. "Mr. Zhao?" "Yes, about those offshore accounts. Execute option B. All of them." By mid-morning, Marshall had compiled an exhaustive record of Robert and Isabella's decade-long conspiracy. Every fraudulent transaction, every manipulated valuation, every illicit transfer, all documented with meticulous precision. His findings revealed the true scope of Robert's ambition. The trans-global merger wasn't just another deal. It was meant to be a corporate extinction event. Sarah's voice came through the intercom. "Mr. Huffman, Mr. Lancaster is asking about the merger documents. Tell him they'll be ready by end of day." "And Sarah? Thank you for your loyalty over the years." Marshall turned to the wall safe hidden behind an original Rothko, a gift from Robert, ironically. Inside lay USB drives containing evidence of tax fraud, embezzlement, and securities violations. Each drive was perfectly organized, ready for distribution to board members. His phone buzzed again. Thomas and Timothy in a group chat. "Dad, Robert mentioned board meeting tomorrow. Still good for Yale summer internships?" Marshall's reply was brief. Focus on your studies. Tomorrow will be educational. A separate message from Victoria. Dad, Mother says you're being difficult about the merger. Robert think. He cut off the message. His youngest children, Victoria and Andrew, would learn soon enough about their mother's true nature. By afternoon, Marshall had discovered something even more damning. Robert hadn't just been documenting the fraud. He'd been keeping detailed records of Isabella's involvement, obviously planning to use it as leverage. The records included Isabella's parallel schemes at their children's private schools, where she'd been embezzling from charity foundations she managed. Protecting himself while betraying her, Marshall noted. How appropriate. He accessed another secure line. Agent Phillips? Yes, it's time. Everything will be on your desk by morning. And the offshore accounts? Yes, all of them. You'll find Mrs. Huffman's fingerprints particularly interesting. The sun was setting when Marshall finished his final preparations. His counterattack was orchestrated with the same precision he'd applied to his most successful mergers. Every detail was accounted for, every contingency planned for. Sarah's voice came through one last time. Mr. Huffman? The board members are confirmed for tomorrow's emergency meeting. Thank you, Sarah. One last thing. Please ensure those USB drives are placed at their seats before the meeting. Marshall stood at his office window, watching the estate's security cameras on his tablet. Isabella's car was pulling up. Another charity meeting with Robert had run late. His children's vehicles were all accounted for, everyone home for what they thought would be a normal family dinner. His phone buzzed with a message from Robert. Marshall, need to discuss some concerning irregularities in the merger documents. Urgent meeting tomorrow, 8 a.m. Marshall allowed himself a small smile as he typed his reply. Of course, Robert. I've found some irregularities myself. Tomorrow will be illuminating. He watched through the security feed as Isabella entered the house, her designer handbag, a gift from Robert, swinging carelessly. Alexandra's voice drifted up from downstairs, discussing Harvard Alumni Association contacts. The twins were arguing about Yale's business school requirements, while Victoria and Andrew debated which summer house they'd use after the merger. Marshall turned back to his computers, implementing the final phases of his plan. By morning, Robert and Isabella's carefully constructed world would collapse. The evidence was irrefutable, the documentation perfect, the trap inescapable. His phone buzzed one last time. Isabella again. Darling, aren't you joining us for dinner? The children want to discuss their future plans. Marshall's reply was succinct. Still working. The future requires careful planning. He turned back to his work, his movements precise and purposeful. They had taught him valuable lessons about family, loyalty, and betrayal. Tomorrow, he would demonstrate exactly how well he had learned them. The night deepened as Marshall executed the final stages of his counterattack. Each move was calculated, each action deliberate. Robert and Isabella had spent a decade building their fraudulent empire. Marshall would dismantle it in a single day. Sarah's final message of the night appeared. Everything is in place, Mr. Huffman. The board members will receive their notifications at dawn. Thank you, Sarah. Tomorrow will be a day of revelations. In the house below, his family continued their evening, unaware that their carefully constructed facade was about to shatter. Marshall allowed himself another small, cold smile. They had mistaken his precision for predictability, his attention to detail for blindness, his loyalty for weakness. Tomorrow, they would understand their error. The night grew later, but Marshall's focus never wavered. His screens displayed the culmination of his work, a comprehensive map of Robert and Isabella's criminal enterprise, ready to be exposed to the world. Every transaction traced, every fraud documented, every betrayal cataloged. His phone's final notification of the night was from Robert Lancaster's private number. Marshall, Isabella mentioned you've been working late. Any concerns about tomorrow's board meeting? Marshall's response was carefully measured. No concerns, Robert. Just ensuring everything is properly documented. See you at 8. He turned back to his screens, implementing the last phases of his plan. They had spent years underestimating him, seeing only what they wanted to see. Tomorrow, they would learn the cost of that mistake. In the quiet of his office, Marshall continued his work, his movements precise, his purpose clear. They had taught him that family loyalty was a weapon. He intended to show them exactly how sharp that weapon could be. Dawn approached, bringing with it the promise of revelation. Marshall's counterattack was ready, every detail perfect, every trap set. Robert and Isabella had orchestrated what they thought was the perfect plan. Tomorrow, they would learn otherwise. As the first light of dawn touched the horizon, Marshall completed his final preparations. The documentation was perfect, the evidence irrefutable, the trap inescapable. In a few hours, the board would convene, and the carefully constructed illusion of the past decade would shatter. His phone lit up with one last message from Isabella. "Darling, you've been in there all night. The children are worried." Marshall's reply was brief. "The future requires sacrifice. Sleep well, Isabella." He turned back to his screens, reviewing his work one final time. They had taught him valuable lessons about family, loyalty, and betrayal. Tomorrow, he would demonstrate exactly how well he had learned them. The night deepened into its final hours as Marshall executed the last stages of his counterattack. Each move was calculated, each action deliberate. Robert and Isabella had spent years building their fraudulent empire. Marshall would dismantle it in a single morning. Sarah's final message appeared. "All preparations are complete, Mr. Huffman. The board members will receive their notifications at dawn." "Thank you, Sarah. Tomorrow will be a day of reckoning." In the house below, his family slept peacefully, unaware that their carefully constructed world was about to collapse. Marshall allowed himself one last, cold smile. They had mistaken his precision for predictability, his attention to detail for blindness, his loyalty for weakness. Tomorrow, they would understand their error. The night grew later, but Marshall's focus never wavered. His screens displayed the culmination of his work, a comprehensive map of Robert and Isabella's criminal enterprise, ready to be exposed to the light of day. Every transaction traced, every fraud documented, every betrayal cataloged. As dawn approached, Marshall sat back in his chair, surveying his work. The trap was set, the evidence compiled, the counterattack ready. They had spent years underestimating him, seeing only what they wanted to see. Tomorrow, they would learn the cost of that mistake. Robert Lancaster strode through Pinnacle's executive terminal, his private jet waiting on the tarmac. Behind him, Bloomberg terminals flashed red as news of the fraud allegations decimated Pinnacle's stock price. The trans-global merger was imploding spectacularly, exactly as Marshall had planned. Mr. Lancaster, his pilot, James Wilson, greeted him at the terminal. "Weather looks clear to the Caymans." Robert barely acknowledged him, too busy barking orders into his phone. "Move everything. I don't care about the fees. Empty all the accounts now." "Problems, sir?" Wilson asked, taking Robert's briefcase. "Just fly the damn plane, Wilson." What Robert didn't know was that Wilson had been Marshall's plant for years, placed specifically for this moment. As they took off, Wilson entered coordinates not for the Caymans, but for a private airstrip where FBI agents waited. Meanwhile, at the Greenwich estate, Isabella frantically dialed numbers on her phone. "What do you mean the accounts are empty?" she screamed at her Swiss banker. "Check again." "Madam Huffman, the accounts were cleared 3 days ago." "Mr. Lancaster's orders." Isabella's perfectly manicured hand trembled as she opened her laptop, accessing the offshore accounts one by one. Each login revealed the same truth. Robert had betrayed her. Her phone buzzed with a text from Robert. "Sorry, darling. Business is business." On her screen, a new email appeared from Marshall's attorney. The subject line, Prenuptial Agreement, Section 7.4. In downtown Manhattan, Alexandra burst into tears as the Harvard Alumni Association rescinded her job offer. Due to emerging allegations of academic fraud, the twins weren't faring better. Yale's Dean of Admissions had some pointed questions about their acceptance and certain donations made by Robert Lancaster. Victoria and Andrew huddled in their respective boarding school dormitories, watching their family's disgrace unfold on national news. Marshall observed it all from a secure location, his laptop displaying multiple feeds. Robert's plane changing course, Isabella's failed bank logins, the federal agents swarming their estate. "Mr. Huffman," Agent Phillips reported via secure line. "Mr. Lancaster's plane is being diverted now. Would you like to watch the arrest?" "No need," Marshall replied. Send me the paperwork when it's done. 3 months later, Marshall sat in his new office, the CEO's suite at Pinnacle Acquisitions. The board's vote had been unanimous. After all, he had saved the company from complete destruction. Robert Lancaster's federal indictment made for interesting reading. Securities fraud, tax evasion, conspiracy. But it was Isabella's charges that drew Marshall's attention. Her charity foundation schemes had been more extensive than anyone suspected. Mr. Huffman, his new assistant, announced, "The FBI has more questions about Mrs. Huffman's activities at the children's schools." "Send them everything," Marshall replied. Every donation, every transaction. The evidence was damning. Isabella had been running parallel embezzlement schemes through various school charity foundations, using her position on their boards to siphon millions. In the federal detention center, Robert Lancaster was learning the cost of betrayal. His fellow inmates didn't take kindly to someone who had planned to leave thousands jobless. Isabella's arrest made headlines. Charity Queen's empire of fraud exposed. Her social circle evaporated overnight. The same people who had attended her lavish fundraisers now pretended they'd never known her. Alexandra faced her own reckoning at Harvard. The Academic Review Board had some uncomfortable questions about her admission and subsequent performance. The twins watched their Yale careers crumble as evidence of Robert's illegal donations emerged. Their trust funds, frozen by federal investigators, revealed a web of fraudulent transfers. Victoria and Andrew struggled with a different kind of loss. Their entire family narrative had been a lie. Marshall implemented sweeping changes at Pinnacle. New anti-fraud measures, transparent accounting practices, ethical oversight committees. The company's stock price responded positively to each reform. 1 year later, Marshall stood at a podium, accepting the Corporate Ethics Leadership Award. Pinnacle's value had tripled under his leadership. The company had become a model of corporate transparency. Integrity, he told the audience, is not negotiable. His eyes swept over the crowd, noting the absent faces of his former family. Alexandra was fighting to keep her Harvard degree. The twins had been expelled from Yale. Victoria and Andrew were learning harsh lessons about trust and betrayal. Robert watched the ceremony on prison TV, his 30-year sentence stretching before him. Through his cell window, he could see the sign of his former car dealership, now Marshall's Corporate Ethics Foundation headquarters. Isabella, awaiting her own trial, discovered the final irony of her betrayal. The prenuptial agreement she had insisted on, meant to protect her assets, now prevented her from claiming any of Marshall's legitimate wealth. "Your Honor," her lawyer argued in court, "Mrs. Huffman's charitable work? You mean her systematic embezzlement from school foundations?" The judge wasn't impressed. Marshall's foundation became a leader in exposing family-based corporate conspiracies. Its first case study, the bonus plan, became required reading at business schools. The story of how one family's greed nearly destroyed an empire, and how integrity ultimately triumphed, served as a warning to corporate America. Marshall's name became synonymous with ethical leadership, while Robert and Isabella became cautionary tales. In his CEO's office, Marshall reviewed the final numbers. Pinnacle had emerged stronger, more transparent, more valuable. His revenge hadn't just been complete, it had been profitable. "Mr. Huffman," his assistant called. "The prison warden is on line 1. Mr. Lancaster is requesting a meeting." Marshall's response was simple. No comment. He turned back to his work, the Manhattan skyline stretching behind him. They had taught him about family, loyalty, and betrayal. He had taught them about consequences. The Corporate Ethics Leadership Award sat on his desk, its inscription catching the light. "To those who choose integrity over family loyalty when the two conflict." Marshall had made his choice. The empty chairs at his family table spoke louder than any revenge could have. Epilogue, the final ledger. 5 years later, Marshall Huffman stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office in the newly renamed Huffman Tower, formerly Pinnacle headquarters. At 53, his success had only amplified his commanding presence. The Wall Street Journal on his desk carried the headline, "Huffman Ethics Foundation expands global reach, corporate watchdog sets new standards." His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Huffman, the prison warden is on line 3. Put him through." Marshall's voice remained as measured as ever. "Mr. Huffman, Robert Lancaster is requesting another meeting. He claims to have information about additional offshore accounts. Tell him what you've told him the last dozen times. All communications go through the Foundation's legal team. The warden cleared his throat. He's not doing well, sir. The appeal denial hit him hard. Neither are the thousands whose pensions he tried to steal, Marshall replied. Anything else? No, sir. Thank you for your time. Marshall pulled up the Foundation's latest report on his tablet. Robert Lancaster's fall had become their most comprehensive case study. 5 years into his 30-year sentence, the former CEO had aged decades. His attempts to bargain his way to a reduced sentence had failed consistently, each appeal revealing new layers of his fraud. The maximum security wing of federal prison was a far cry from his former penthouse. The only view from his cell was the gleaming headquarters of the Huffman Ethics Foundation, formerly his prized luxury car dealership. The Foundation's illuminated sign served as a nightly reminder of his downfall. Sarah, Marshall's longtime assistant and now the Foundation's COO, entered with a stack of reports. The latest from the Isabella Lancaster case, sir. Marshall noted the name change. Isabella had reverted to Lancaster after the divorce, a final act of desperation that backfired spectacularly. The prenuptial agreement she'd insisted on had worked exactly as intended, just not in her favor. How's she enjoying house arrest? Marshall asked, though he already knew the answer. The ankle monitor doesn't match her designer wardrobe, Sarah replied with a slight smile. The latest appeal was denied. Her legal team tried to argue that the Charity Foundation embezzlement was Robert's idea, and the evidence showed otherwise. Your documentation was flawless, as usual. The judge particularly enjoyed the recordings of her bragging about fooling the school boards. Isabella's fall from grace had been absolute. After serving 3 years in federal prison for fraud, the twins, Thomas and Timothy, had faced their own reckonings. Yale's expulsion had led to a series of increasingly desperate attempts to trade on their former connections. Their trust funds, revealed to be built entirely on fraudulent transfers, had been seized and redistributed to Pinnacle's Victim Compensation Fund. Thomas tried to contact the Foundation again, Sarah continued. He's offering to speak at our corporate ethics seminars. Timothy is still trying to day trade with what's left of their allowance. Victoria had chosen a different path. After the truth emerged about her family's crimes, she'd legally changed her name and enrolled in a public high school. Now in her second year of community college, she was the only one who'd made a clean break from her parents' influence. Andrew, the youngest at 20, was studying engineering at a state university under a merit scholarship, the only one of Marshall's children to earn his place legitimately. He occasionally sent progress reports through the Foundation's legal team, maintaining professional but distant contact. The latest numbers from Pinnacle? Marshall asked, turning to the business empire he'd rebuilt from the ashes of betrayal. Sarah projected the quarterly report onto the wall screen. Under Marshall's leadership, Pinnacle had become a model of corporate transparency and ethical governance. The stock price had quadrupled, the workforce had grown by 30%, and the company's ethical business practices had set new industry standards. The SEC is using our compliance framework as a template, Sarah noted. 3 other Fortune 500 companies have adopted our transparency protocols. Marshall nodded, turning to another matter. The Lancaster family's last attempt to access the offshore accounts? Failed spectacularly. Your early warning to the Swiss authorities proved invaluable. Robert's hidden transfers to his personal accounts were tracked and seized. Isabella's attempts to claim ignorance of the accounts backfired when our documentation showed her signature on the original paperwork. The Foundation's legal team had systematically dismantled every attempt by Robert or Isabella to salvage any part of their stolen fortune. Each appeal, each legal challenge, each desperate plea had only served to strengthen the case against them. Marshall's phone buzzed with a news alert. Lancaster charity fraud. New evidence reveals deeper conspiracy. The article detailed how Isabella's embezzlement from school foundations had begun even before her marriage to Marshall, a fact she'd hidden from everyone, including Robert. Your speech for next week's Ethics and Leadership Conference? Sarah inquired. Done. No mentions of names, as usual. The facts speak for themselves. The Foundation had grown beyond even Marshall's initial vision. What started as a watchdog organization had evolved into a global authority on corporate ethics and family-based fraud prevention. Their case studies were taught at business schools worldwide, with the bonus plan remaining their most compelling example. A notification popped up on Marshall's screen, a message from Agent Phillips, now the FBI's Deputy Director of Financial Crimes. Thought you'd want to know. Robert tried to broker another deal. Claims he can expose Isabella's earliest frauds in exchange for a transfer to minimum security. We declined. Marshall's reply was brief. As expected, the Foundation's investigation had already uncovered those frauds, along with evidence that Robert had known about them from the beginning. Their mutual betrayal had been documented in exquisite detail, each partner planning to abandon the other once the trans-global merger was complete. Sarah cleared her throat. One more thing, sir. The Princeton Ethics Department wants to do a longitudinal study on the case. They're particularly interested in the children's rehabilitation outcomes. Forward them the public records. Nothing more. Marshall's position on his former family remained consistent, professional distance maintained through legal channels. He neither helped nor hindered their attempts to rebuild their lives, letting the consequences of their choices play out naturally. The sun was setting over Manhattan as Marshall reviewed the Foundation's latest initiative, a global database tracking family-based corporate fraud patterns. The system would help identify warning signs and prevent future schemes, using the Lancaster case as its baseline. Will you be attending Robert's next parole hearing? Sarah asked, though she knew the answer. No need. The documentation speaks for itself. Robert's previous hearings had become increasingly desperate performances. His attempts to portray himself as a victim of circumstances had crumbled under the weight of evidence. The parole board had access to every document, every recording, every betrayal. Isabella's latest court-mandated psychiatric evaluation had revealed what Marshall had known all along. Her remorse was as fraudulent as her charity work. She'd spent her prison time networking with white-collar criminals, already planning her next schemes. The Foundation's annual report is ready for review, Sarah noted. The section on preventing inherited positions of trust is particularly relevant. The report detailed how family connections had been used to disguise financial fraud, using the Lancaster case as its primary example. Alexandra's grooming for Marshall's position, the twins' fraudulent Yale admissions, Victoria and Andrew's planned roles, all had been documented and analyzed. Marshall's phone buzzed again, a message from his corporate ethics professor at Harvard Business School. Your case study has transformed our curriculum. Would you consider giving this year's commencement address? He typed a brief acceptance. The irony wasn't lost on him. The institution that had unknowingly hosted part of Robert and Isabella's scheme would now hear from the man who exposed it. As night fell over Manhattan, Marshall stood at his office windows one last time. The city stretched before him, its lights reflecting off the Huffman Tower's glass facade. In a cell hundreds of miles away, Robert Lancaster would be watching the Foundation's sign illuminate the darkness. In her modest apartment, Isabella would be planning another doomed appeal. Their children, scattered across the country, would be facing their own daily reminders of choices and consequences. Alexandra in her entry-level position, the twins in their failed trading ventures, Victoria in her community college classes, Andrew in his engineering studies. Sarah appeared at his door. Car's ready, sir. The Foundation's board meeting starts in 30 minutes. Marshall gathered his papers. The Foundation's latest initiative would help other companies identify and prevent family-based fraud schemes. The Lancaster case would continue teaching its lessons long after its principals had faced their final judgments. One last thing, Sarah added. Isabella's publisher reached out again about the book deal. Same answer as always, Marshall replied. Let the evidence tell the story. He stepped into the elevator, descending toward the Foundation's headquarters. The former luxury car dealership had been transformed into a center for corporate ethics research, its mission statement carved in marble. Integrity above all. In the end, Robert and Isabella had taught him valuable lessons about family, loyalty, and betrayal. Through the Foundation, he would ensure those lessons benefited generations of corporate leaders to come. Their story had become a cautionary tale, their names synonymous with fraud and betrayal. But the true legacy of the Lancaster affair wasn't in their downfall, it was in the systems and safeguards their scheme had inspired. Marshall's revenge hadn't just been complete. It had been transformative. The empire they tried to steal had become a fortress of corporate integrity, their betrayal fueling a global movement for ethical business practices. As his car pulled away from the tower, Marshall allowed himself a small smile. They had taught him about the price of trust. He had taught the world about the value of truth. The final ledger was balanced. The books were closed. The bonus plan had paid its last dividend.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy the story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.